Chapter 351, Because I Don't Want to. Carmen looked at his old father sawing wood in front of the wooden hut. Then he walked up and looked at the stack of wood in confusion. "My dear father, you are doing what?" "Building a vessel, a miniature version." Jacquinot wiped the sweat from his forehead as he stared at the yet-to-be-assembled keel beside the lake. "Building a vessel? What's the purpose of that?" Carmen looked at his father, puzzled. "If the work that had conquered the Atlantic Ocean has no purpose," Jacquinot said bluntly, "then including us, including everything, all would be without purpose." He said something with an ambiguous meaning, but Carmen seemed to be accustomed to his father saying things people didn't understand, so he didn't express his attitude as he only sighed in reply. "Okay, but do you know how to build a vessel?" "I don't know." Jacquinot laughed delightfully. He pointed his saw at the keel starting to take shape. "Don't underestimate it because it's just a ship. There are a lot of tricks to be learned, including how to treat the wood and how to connect the wood. To construct this keel, it took me an entire year. Although I failed many times, the process was surprisingly fun." Carmen looked at his father in surprise, then he looked earnestly at the keel. "Hard to imagine." "Did no one help you?" "Sides wanted to find me a boatman, but I rejected the proposal. I wanted to explore by myself on how the vessel worked." He flung the saw in his hand to the side as Jacquinot picked up the bottle of water on the tree trunk and took a few big gulps. Carmen looked at his father immersed in the activity. He was silent for 2 seconds before he said, "I heard you needed to see me." "Give up on that prophecy." Jacquinot didn't look at him, but rather at the keel. Carmen was shocked because of his father's abrupt words. After a moment, he said with difficulty, "Why?" Jacquinot's sight returned as he looked at his son's eyes keenly. "The infant would have to leave the parents one day and learn how to walk by himself. They told us a lot, but they can't tell us more. If we continue to follow this path, the future we face might be more upsetting than the situation they had gained. But if we listen to the wise words of the intellect, wouldn't it save us the trouble of going through detours?" "Who said detours are wrong?" Jacquinot asked back. Carmen fell into silence. Seeing that his son didn't speak, Jacquinot continued to speak about things with deeper meaning. "Humans should build on the intelligence of its ancestor and not depend on the future to further the future. Although history has changed, the trend will not change. The next 20 years belong to artificial intelligence, then a technological explosion led by breakthroughs in material science." And then, unable to agree with his father's perspective, Carmen said softly, "That might not be the case." Jacquinot scorned before he picked up the saw on the ground. "Did you see this keel? If I told you how to build a vessel, how to build a steam vessel, if I died one day, would you be able to build an aircraft carrier?" "That's the scientist's job," Carmen said with an indifferent voice. "Science and capital were tied together from the very beginning. Technology determines the space humans live in, and capital expands the space. That is the nature of the science and capital." "Did you give back all your economic knowledge to your Harvard professor?" "I suggest you reread the Schumpeter function chapter." The old father returned to working in front of the tree truck and ignored his son. He stood beside the lake for a long time. It was not until the sky in the distance began to turn yellow did he finally turn around and leave the wooden hut of his father. The next morning, Zhang Chen took a flight to Australia. Because of the combination of airport size and traffic, the airport located in Coral Island only had flights to nearby Australia and New Zealand. Therefore, to travel from Han to Xin, he would have to the first flight to Australia. After a rather lengthy journey, Zhang Chen finally got out of the plane at Coral Island. It was midnight. When he walked out of the airport, Aisha was already waiting for him. "Head to the presidential palace," Zhang Chen said directly after getting on the car. Aisha nodded and started the car. "Do you not need to go home and rest?" As she drove, she nonchalantly asked. "There is no need. If they don't see me, someone might lose sleep because of it," Zhang Chen mocked before leaning back in the seat with his eyes closed. Aisha grinned as she didn't speak for the remainder of the trip. When they arrived at the presidential palace, he explained his identity, and the guard immediately let him pass through. With an attendant's reception, Zhang Chen arrived in Zhang Yapen's office. After a few days apart, the guy was more haggard. It was clear that the troubles had gotten the better of him. When he saw Zhang Chen, he looked relieved as he couldn't wait to greet him. "You're finally back." Zhang Yapen smiled bitterly when he looked at Zhang Chen. "Don't ask me what to do yet, explain to me the situation first," Zhang Chen said concisely. Zhang Yapen nodded and began to explain to Zhang Chen what has happened in the last few days. First, after Ivan ordered to take out the fishing boats obstructing the construction of the military facility and led the force in a standoff with the country F Coastal Guards. The F Coastal Guards were first extremely aggressive and hostile. They didn't think the three Xin fast boats were competition. Just as they were about to enter the Xin territory to demand people, Ivan took out the weapons without wavering. They were dumbfounded. They didn't think Xin would have the courage to do this as they were without a plan. Although the Coastal Guards were equipped with light weapons, the Coastal Guards didn't dare make a decision that could cause a severe repercussion in their diplomatic relationship, since once the first shot is fired, it would be a regional conflict. So they could only remain in a standoff, at the same time, reporting the message to their superior. Finally, the F President Aquino came in contact with Zhang Yapen, but Zhang Yapen didn't realize what had happened at New Moon Island since the national defense was the responsibility of Celestial Trade Company. Zhang Yapen realized something was off immediately and got in touch with Ivan before he learned about the event. Okay, he had to admit that when Ivan sunk the reckless fishing boats looking for trouble, oh no, pirate boats, he too did curse in his mind. This feels fucking great. Although the relationship between the Panu Islands and Country F was not a generational feud, the grudge has been building among the public for a while. But he was the Xin president, after all, he had to consider national interest above his personal emotions. After he calmed down, a drop of cold sweat rolled down his forehead. Just the day before, Aquino notified him that if the recovery work could not be commenced within the next 3 days, Country F retained the option of solving this through military means to ensure that the legitimate rights and interests of their citizen abroad are maintained. But when Zhang Yapen said the last sentence, Zhang Chen was immediately unhappy. "Fuke the legitimate rights and interests," Zhang Chen cursed out. "Military means? Funny. I will teach them a lesson." He hasn't cursed like this for a long time. Country F has an enlisted military of 120,000 people. "We might not even beat a battalion of theirs," Zhang Yapen said in a small voice. Zhang Chen glared at him and laughed. "Who said we would fight them? But they are already threatening us like this," Zhang Yapen said with a bitter face. Country F always maintained an image of being a victim in sea territory disputes to garner the compassion of the international society. They would never send out their military force to start a war with us. But Zhang Yapen was still not convinced, but Zhang Chen interrupted him. "Also, the key is still Han and do you remember what I told you? Maintain neutrality and don't sway to either superpower. If Country F decide to take military actions against us, it will force us to join Han as an ally, and Han would definitely not let go of an opportunity to break the first and second islands' chains and proactively provide us with assistance. The would be reluctant to see the Han gaining a military base in the western Pacific Ocean, so they must restrain its ally from being too reckless." Culturally, Xin was more similar to Han, but ideologically, it was more aligned with This situation resulted in both superpowers think the country would join forces with them. "Because we haven't chosen a side yet, we are safe," Zhang Chen patted President Zhang on the shoulder as he said with sincere words. Although Zhang Chen had his reasons, Zhang Yapen still thought it was a bit forced. "But why don't we stand by and continue the diplomatic strategy of the previous regime?" he asked in a low voice. Zhang Chen's eyebrows raised. "Because I don't fucking want to." Chapter 352, Refuse to apologize. The private military contractor was the legal term for mercenary. It was also a term that gave all the head of the states a headache, but they were unable to part away from it. They act truthlessly and treat war like a business. To complete the mission, they could ignore international laws, disregard civilian casualties, toss aside any moral concerns, and complete the most challenging task using the lowest coasting method. They have a despicable name, but their hire would not need to burden their terrible reputation. They were more effective than an army. Talking about the mercenary, the must be mentioned here. There is no other country that has a better understanding of mercenaries than them, similar to how only thugs could understand gangsters. From the Persian Gulf to Afghanistan, the reason why the black blood flowing among the steel parts could successfully move from third world countries to the first world was that half the effort could be attributed to the lawless mercenaries. Not only on a battlefield, but in any area with politically unstable conditions, the mercenary could be seen. As long as there was a need, the private military contract company would appear in place of the Pentagon. When it was not appropriate or inconvenient for them to appear, the contractor would carry out the military and foreign diplomat missions for the military. Even if it failed, they could deny any connections with the government. It was indeed more convenient compared to the Marines because sending out ground force to another country would be a war activity, but not when it was a mercenary force. And the privatization of the military would bring serious implications to the world. It was an unrealistic hope to demand private mercenaries from following international law. In 2006, the shooting Iraq civilians brought massive commotion to the internet, but it was proved that the perpetrators were two military contractors from Clover Jungle. As to the reasons for committing the crime, it was absurd to the point where it was daunting. A colleague of the perpetrator confirmed that he said he was going to kill someone because he didn't hit anyone in Iraq. But regardless, the military dodged litigation with human rights group, because the killers were not enlisted soldiers. Although for the military had a despicable reputation to begin with, it was not a big deal. Right now, the international problem between ZIN and F was the same. Disregarding the fishing boats that trespassed into the military zone, disregarding Ivan's 1-minute warning, which fit the standards of effective warning, it was still undetermined internationally if the military actions of mercenaries should be considered an act of war. Then the problem arose. ZIN hired private mercenaries for its national defense, and the private mercenary group executed according to the law and sunk the F country fishing boats disregarding the warning. Is ZIN really at wrong for this incident? Any country has the right to shoot trespassers of its military facility, but only a few countries would execute this right. The most humanitarian way was to remove the trespassers, or capture and deport them to avoid international conflict. Is there any country that executed this right? Of course. On July 11 of 2008, a South Korean tourist accidentally entered a military zone of North Korea and was shot on sight by North Korean soldiers. Although North Korea was not wrong, unfortunately, the South Korean government immediately announced a restriction of all South Koreans from visiting North Korea. But what ZIN faced was much less severe, because it was the private military contractor that sunk the fishing boats, not the ZIN army. Zhang Yapen's newly formed cabinet must be praised for their work in handling emergency public relationship issues. Zhang Chen only had an order: it was to never compromise on territorial issues, never give in to the question of sovereignty, and never apologize for the lack of mistakes. However, the politicians ended up being the defenders of the policy internationally. Although ZIN's defense minister had no troops to work with, he still offered constructive comments. For example, shifting the blame to solve the problem, insisting that it was the Celestial Trade Company that sunk the ships and not the order of the Department of National Defense. Therefore, the responsibilities were blamed continuously on the other party. The situation dragged on for over half a month before Zhang Chen permitted the wreckage recovery process to begin. Although they didn't permit country F boats from entering the territory to assist with the recovery process, ZIN still invited some international media stations to participate to ensure the process was just. But what shocked everyone was that there were assault rifles found on the F country's fish boats. As to why there were assault rifles on the fishing boats, the media teams all had varying opinions, ranging from the fishermen being framed to they actually possessed those weapons. In the end, no consensus was formed. At the same time, the reckless acts of F fishermen near New Moon Island were organized and published. including several acts of intentionally sinking Zin fishing boats. The 50-minute documentary included a dictation from the son of the victim and documented records. It was published on a social media platform before Future 1.0's news platform transmitted the video to the world and attached to it a visible headline. Pirates or fishermen, the reckless acts of F-country fishermen with the support of the government. Greater than. The video was only published for a day before it surpassed 10 million views. Other media stations all began to transmit the video as it caused massive controversy internationally. Almost all the opinions compassionate to Country F turned into criticisms of Country F's crimes. The F government immediately jumped out and blamed Future International for the lack of truth and exaggeration in the video, as well as the lack of neutrality a media should possess. They should not have a bias just because they have a construction contract with Zin. At the same time, the F-country spokesperson demanded Future International immediately delete all associated comments and issue an apology. Would Country F apologize to a bunch of monkeys? The answer was of course not. Future International issued a statement stating that the video did not represent the views of the company. Future 1.0 is only a platform and not the publisher of the video. Future International will not bear any responsibility. At the same time, Future International, with the justification of freedom of speech, refused to delete the video and refused to apologize. Although the action caused strong discontent from Country F, it certainly gained the support of other parties. Because of this, Future International didn't suffer any losses but instead benefited from this dispute. You pigs. Aquino cursed at the foreign minister of Country F. How many times do I have to say this? Remain strong on the stance. Pressure their government. We have an army of 120,000 soldiers. That's more than 6 times their population. But President, we are already aggressive in our statements. Some of the statements could even be viewed as an act of aggression, but they don't seem to be afraid of us, the Foreign Affairs Minister said with a bitter smile. Aquino paused for a moment. Looks like it is time to teach them a lesson. These monkeys in the Pacific don't know any better, the defense minister said wickedly. But he wants us to remain restrained on this issue. Excessive pressure may cause the neutral nation to lean towards Han, the Foreign Affairs Minister reminded. But if we don't do anything, our citizens will be unhappy, the defense minister argued back. Aquino fell into deep thought as he debated the cabinet members' arguments. Suddenly, a grimace look flashed through his eyes. Mercenaries, right, excellent. He already had an idea in his mind. Chapter 353, Seaweed that could generate electricity. In this month, Zin was indeed in a turbulence of problems. Because of too many headlines originating from there, a lot of the press decided to send a reporter to the station to acquire first-hand information. Other than that, there were more tourists interested in exploring this not-yet-developed island out of curiosity. The streets of Koro Island were filled with tourists in backpacks. A country with only 9 islands and a government that didn't control its armies. Some of the far-thinking organizations even expressed that this was a jewel of a true democracy. The expression on the puppet president's face would certainly be interesting when he heard these words. The news was a form of advertisement. There weren't a lot of chances for the country to make headlines in the international section. Before that, no one had ever heard of Banu Islands in the Pacific Ocean, but following the recent series of events as well as Future International's role in purposely stirring up the conversation, a lot more people began to have an impression of the small Pacific country. Regardless if the impression was positive or not, it certainly paved the way for future marketing. Once the basic and tourism infrastructure completed development and the political situation stabilized, there certainly would be a crowd willing to come to the mystical island, enjoy the beauty of the West Pacific, and experience the unique culture. With the current rate of construction, the soonest they could be ready was within half a year, slowest within a year. The day wasn't far away. While Zhang Yapin had a headache to deal with, the perpetrator of everything, Zhang Chen, was enjoying his life. Although he promised he would take care of this, he only left Zhang Yapin with one clear instruction of never apologizing before he abandoned the issue. Then Zhang Chen headed to New Moon Island for a few days, and who knows what he did on the island. Regarding Country F's potential impending revenge, he didn't seem to be concerned as the major shareholder. Zhang Yapin was unsure whether he was confident or just plain arrogant. From the perspective of the Xin president, he obviously wanted him to be the former. In the next few days, Zhang Chen spent his time on a boat around the islands. Of course, it wasn't for fun but rather for business. Because of the $10 billion project, he became the largest real estate owner of Panu with 110 square kilometers on the main island, 70 square kilometers on the other island, in addition to the sea territory near the equator becoming part of his assets. Whether he would develop his territory personally or sell it to other people would all be based on his discretion. Of course, with this much land, he alone certainly wouldn't be able to develop it all. If left to its own devices, the land would only accumulate weeds. He toured all the land he owned in the past few days and decided how he should develop the land. After completing all this, there was also good news from the apocalypse. After half a month of research and experimentation, the improved recipe of nutrient supply was successfully developed. When he heard the news from Lin Lin, he immediately returned to the apocalypse and took a helicopter to Camp 27. When he arrived underground, he found the director of the research team in the empty fallout shelter. "I heard you finished it?" When Zhang Chen saw the slim middle-aged man, he hastily jumped to the topic. Wang Fengpin looked at Zhang Chen in excitement as he quickly nodded his head. "We finished it. Yesterday, we completed the trial process. It's hard to believe we did it. We previously thought we were just improving on the recipe, but we somehow made a technological breakthrough in the live cell preparation field." Technological breakthrough. Zhang Chen took a moment to digest this before his face turned to shock. In the apocalypse covered in ruins, it was a feat to replicate the technology from before the war, let alone make any technological breakthroughs. But now, Wang Fengpin told him that the research team managed to do just that. "That's right." Wang Fengpin nodded in excitement. "Following your requirements, to compress the production cost and improve the nutrient supply, we chose to use seaweed that has the most yield and shortest growth cycle. But when we were in the process of induced differentiation of the seaweed cells, surprisingly, we created a new type of seaweed." "What is it?" Zhang Chen was drawn into it. "A type of seaweed that can generate electricity," Wang Fengpin said, ecstatic. Zhang Chen was truly stunned. Energy was always a critical priority in development, whether it was in the wasteland or the modern world. At the end of the 21st century of this world, biological power generation was the research priority of the three countries before there was a miraculous breakthrough in nuclear fusion power generation and before the first space elevator was built. It was only then that hydrogen-3 was continually transported back to the Earth to create the relatively cheap nuclear fusion battery. It cooled down the investment in biological power generation. 1 gram of hydrogen fusion generation created an equivalent power equal to the complete combustion of 11.2 tons of standard coal, along with preserving the environment. Such a massive amount of energy was leagues ahead of other types of power generation techniques. Because of this, although other power generation methods all possess the theoretical potential to develop further, no one conducted more research. But whether it was in the wasteland or in the modern world, renewable clean energy dominated the large market. Just like in Panu Islands, since the area was designated as a tourist area, the coal-fired generation plant with relatively high pollution would not be built on the island. The island could only use the high-cost and low-efficiency tidal power generation combined with solar power to meet the energy needs of the islands. But if this existed, the Panu Islands' massive sea would provide Xin with an endless amount of energy. Xin would no longer need to worry about power. It was certainly a pleasant surprise to make a breakthrough in biotechnology during the nutrient supply recipe development process. Zhang Chen was astonished. The seaweed cells during photosynthesis cause a special photographic effect, creating a trace amount of electricity within the content of the cell. Although the electricity of a single cell is negligible, it is substantial for an entire seaweed plant. Wang Fengpin began to explain the theory behind this type of seaweed. Although he explained it in simple terms, Zhang Chen was only interested in the last sentence. What's the power generation amount per area? Zhang Chen couldn't help but ask. The current power generational efficiency is relatively low. It can only achieve 0.1 kilowatts per square meter. Most of the power is converted into heat, diffusing and increasing the temperature of the nearby water region, and there are also concerns about electricity diffusion underwater. But with the prediction of the mathematical model, if all these problems are fixed, it would generate up to 1 kilowatt per square meter. 1 kilowatt per square meter. Zhang Chen was again stunned. If it were solar generation, 10 kilowatts of energy would require 40 panels with an area approximately equivalent to 64 square meters. Therefore, the energy generation would equate to 0.15 kilowatt per square meter. The biological generator used solar energy, but its electricity generation was 6.6 times better than traditional solar panels. With the stunned look on Zhang Chen's face, Wang Fengpin was relieved. When they learned that there weren't a lot of nuclear fusion batteries on the surface and that the base primarily used solar panels for power generation, he immediately thought of the stagnated power generational technology at the end of the 21st century. He happened to be a scientist in biotechnology, as his first idea was biological power generation. While the technology was yet to be completed, it wasn't a hard task to create it standing on top of the giant. Just like a math problem that couldn't be done by an elementary student could easily be solved in high school. Because of the disconnect between Moon and Earth, the outdated power generation technology again had its purpose. To be honest, their research team had completed the nutrient supply recipe 5 days ago. The reason why they chose to report their findings 5 days later was to research about seaweed power generation. It wasn't a coincidence that they discovered the cell, but rather the result of genetic modification. He was afraid of telling Zhang Chen because he feared this dictator would penalize them for using up excessive research resources and intentionally delaying the reporting of the research findings. Now that Zhang Chen was pleased with their research, he felt relieved. With this, because this topic gained the traction, there was hope to continue their research. They would no longer need to live back on the surface and suffer. But their concern was excessive. Zhang Chen didn't mind them doing personal work, since their research all belonged to him in the end anyway. You guys did a great job. Excellent. What rewards do you want? Zhang Chen laughed as he patted Wang Fengpin on the shoulder. No need for rewards. Wang Fengpin shook his hands and smiled. Just let us stay in the fallout shelter to continue our research. We have some achievements in the biological field. I must reward you for your contribution to the base. Zhang Chen thought for a moment before he had an idea. I have an idea. To reward you for your outstanding contribution to the base's energy problem, I will reward you 5 with the honor of outstanding scholars, and a knight emblem. From now on, you will be the knight class of the Fishbone base. Don't underestimate the outstanding scholar name. It would mean that you're permitted to freely enter and leave the fallout shelter without the permission of the camp leader. Even without working on this research project, you can live inside. Wang Fengpin was ecstatic. Thank you, General. He had no interest in becoming part of the knight class. He never visited the Fishbone base before, nor did he want to. His only wish was to stay in the safe and comfortable fallout shelter. No need to thank me now. I will only grant you the honor after you complete the project. Zhang Chen smiled. Count on us. We'll definitely complete this project. Wang Fengpin promised. Then I will wait for your good news. Let's not talk about this anymore. Take me to see the improved nutrient supply. Seeing the nutrient supply was the priority of Zhang Chen's trip. The faster it was produced, the sooner he could make money. He didn't forget that he had 30 billion in debt. Chapter 354, Nutrient Supply Plant. Ange Island, located at the southern tip of Banu Island near New Guinea, was the third largest island of Sian. The island was shaped like a pear and the mountain sat at the east end of the island while south of the mountain was the cliffs. The island was covered in dense vegetation with only the plains on the north side settled with people. The population of the island was 5,372 in the municipality Ange City, the second largest city of Panu Islands. Although it was the second largest city after Koro Island, the economy of the island was still comprised of mostly fisheries along with sugar cane, banana and coconut plantations as the secondary industry. Regarding the crops and meat, the island relied on shipments from Australia's Darwin port. The island didn't possess a deep-water harbour, but it had a harbour capable of docking vessels with a smaller displacement. For the residents of Ange Island, today marked the start of a new chapter. Why? Because after a month of construction, Future International's subsidiary, Future Biology, completed construction of their pharmaceutical and seaweed growth plant. But for the people of Ange Island, they were focused on the plan to hire locals. To Ange Island that had a history of a high unemployment rate, it was certainly great news. 50 people with high school diplomas get a monthly salary of $1,000 per month. 20 people with university degrees get a monthly salary of $1,500 per month. The contract is signed for 20 years minimum. During this time, the employees must sign a confidentiality agreement and are not permitted to leave the job or the country. At the same time, employees will enjoy the luxury apartment provided by the company, along with a free medical insurance and pension plan. Greater than. When the hiring information was posted, the entire island erupted in cheers. To the poor locals, the benefits of the job could be described as insane. They only made a max of $500 per month fishing, and the job was also tiring. Even if they didn't know what the job was like, it must be less tiring compared to fishing from morning to night. Not permitted to leave the job or the country, a lot of people didn't even leave the island for their entire life, let alone the country. They wanted the job to be longer, maybe for their whole life. Because of the high number of applicants, Future Biology added some additional requirements. For example, high school diploma holders had to know how to dive, drive a boat, be familiar with the sea product farming process, must be a local, and have a family. The first two requirements were given since almost all the residents on the island lived alongside the sea for their entire life. Although the last two conditions were strange, they were certainly not unacceptable. After a rigorous selection process, Future Biology quickly hired 70 employees. With Zhang Chen's organization, everyone arrived at New Moon Island for training. The training was just an instructional video recorded at Camp 27 with an examination afterwards. While the workers diligently studied the growing process they never learned before, Zhang Chen stood on the dock on the port at Ange Island as he waited for the boat in the distance to approach. To the person who came down from the boat, Zhang Chen greeted him with a smile and extended his right hand. "Hello, Dr. Zhan." Zhan Shuji, 31 years old, medical student at Tsinghua University Life Science Department majoring in molecular cell biology. He published 5 papers in the SCI and also published in the famous academic journal Nature in the scientific community. Of course, Zhang Chen never minded an extensive amount of talents. To the top student graduating from Hua's top university, Zhang Chen generously offered a salary of $500,000 per year. The young man wasn't tall and he wore a frameless glasses. Although he had a high academic profile as a doctor, he didn't have the Confucius arrogance typical of a lot of top students. He looked like someone easy to get along with. "Hello, Mr. Zhang." Zhan Shuji smiled and warmly held on to Zhang Chen's hand. Regarding the legendary individual who achieved a net asset of over 10 billion by just the age of 23, Zhan Shuji had heard tales of him before. Previously, he thought this boss would be somewhat prideful, but he was actually easy to talk to, which made him quite impressed. "Haha, let's cut the flattering words. Do you need me to take to where you'll be living?" Zhang Chen smiled. "No need. I want to first take a tour of the pharmaceutical plant, is that okay?" When he talked about the pharmaceutical plant, his eyes were flashed with fervor. Of course, As you wish. This car will belong to you from now on, and this is the driver. Zhang Chen sat back into the car. Celestial Trade's bodyguard was the driver and he was injected with E-grade genetic vaccine. Whether in armed combat or just close body combat, he met the standards of the Special Force. As the driver of Dr. Zhan Shuji, his job was to protect his safety and monitor him. Since what Zhan Shuji would present to the world would shock the entire world, he already signed a confidentiality agreement, but just in case, it was better to be safe. The car soon arrived at Future Biology's pharmaceutical plant. At the top of the structure inside the wall, Zhan Shuji saw the name of the plant. Nutrient Supply? That's an interesting name, Zhan Shuji muttered to himself despite reading about the company before he came. The two security guards on duty at the pharmaceutical plant were also from Celestial Trade. They wore carbon nano-injected bulletproof vests with Reaper assault rifles and tactical helmets. Is it not safe here? Zhan Shuji anxiously looked at the two soldiers as he said, worried. Don't worry, it's extremely safe here, but just in case, I hired 2 security personnel to protect the safety of the employees and to also protect the security of the high-tech equipment inside. When they got off the car and walked into the plant, the soldiers at the door subconsciously wanted to salute to Zhang Chen, but Zhang Chen stopped them with a look. They walked to the empty ground of the plant as Zhang Chen first pointed at the direction near the coast. The plant is a seaweed farm, used to breed our company-developed DH-type seaweed. This seaweed is derived from the induction of the differentiation of sargassum, which can produce and accumulate a variety of animal proteins in seaweed cells. That's impossible. Zhan Shuji was stunned as he looked at Zhang Chen skeptically. As far as I know, in the field of the preparation of plants for animal protein, Hokkaido University in Japan is currently at the forefront of the field, but they are only able to do it with the production of a plant to produce interfering hepatitis virus protein, animal protein, and they're only in the experimental stage. Also, I've never heard that someone could use a plant to produce a variety of animal protein. Also, seaweed cells aren't embryonic liver cells. So how could the orientation-induced technique work? In theory, this wouldn't work. Zhan Shuji blasted at Zhang Chen, while Zhang Chen tilted his head and shook his finger to show off. Nothing is impossible, especially in my company. If you don't believe me, just take a sample yourself. Zhan Shuji looked at Zhang Chen still with skepticism and took a deep breath. Okay, I'll believe it once I see it. But I have another question. Growing the new species with the open environment, would that affect the biological sphere of the nearby sea? No. Zhang Chen shook his head. Since it's induced differentiation, the genes of this DH seaweed still belong to sargassum, so the spores produced by the progeny are also sargassum. The telomeres of this DH-type seaweed are precisely targeted like cancer cells, which are theoretically infinite. The task of workers is to feed nutrients every day, then trim the leaves. This was what the researchers at the fallout shelter told him, and he didn't have the knowledge to explain much further, so Zhang Chen changed the topic and pointed at the structure the size of 3 basketball fields. The key equipment is inside. Your work is to coordinate the entire pharmaceutical plant's production, take samples to examine if the DH seaweed is thriving, and take samples to ensure the quality of the nutrient supply. Of course, all of the details are in the work manual. I will give you a USB and the videos on it will teach you how to control the equipment inside the plant. If there are any problems you can't solve, please contact me. As Zhang Chen spoke, he took Zhan Shuji inside the pharmaceutical plant and pointed at the machine in the center. This is it, the production line of nutrient supply, the core of the entire plant. On the left was the organic converter with the shape of a cylinder. It could extract nutrients from the specially produced seaweed to process into the nutrient supply. On the right hand was an assembly for bottling, as it would place the extract into coin-shaped plastic tubes before they were sealed. Regarding this set of equipment, Zhan Shuji didn't seem to be too interested, but regarding the organic converter, it completely drew all his attention. The molecular filter from the legend is inside this machine? Ahem. Not from the legend. Our company's molecular orientation screening technology is mature. The molecular filter is only one of the parts of the organic converter, there are also other devices inside. Zhang Chen came up with an elaborate story. What else? The fervent passion once again appeared on Zhan Shuji's face. It was the zeal a scientist possessed when he wanted to learn about a technology he didn't know about. Trade secret, Zhang Chen said straightforwardly. Zhan Shuji paused for a moment as he realized that he was overzealous, so he apologized. Sorry, I got too excited. It's okay, I understand how you feel, Zhang Chen said gently. Zhan Shuji walked in front of the organic converter as he put his hand on the cold steel. He exclaimed, hard to believe that this breakthrough technology will first be used in the civil field to produce a drink. This is a waste of God-given technology. To be honest, two reasons drew him here. The $500,000 salary and the technology Future Biology said they possessed. Plant cell orientation-induced differentiation could produce a variety of animal protein algae. High-precision molecular screening technology, any of technology here, could contend for the Nobel Prize. But this guy wanted to use these to produce a drink? Chapter 355, Trade Secret. Ahem. Let me clarify. This isn't a drink, it's a type of healthy food that can allow you to lose weight, Zhang Chen reminded Zhan Shuji. It was disrespectful to call the era-breaking liquid food a drink. This was the standard military food in the 22nd century. Not only was it used in the military, the liquid food was also used extensively in the aerospace field. To bring as much food as possible within the allocated space, the nutrient supply was undoubtedly the first choice for all astronauts. Of course, Zhang Chen didn't deny the ridicule of Zhan Shuji, stating it was a waste of God-given technology. Regardless, right now, he only planned to sell this as weight loss medicine. Is there a difference? Zhanji stared at Zhang Chen emotionally. His persona as a non-talkative researcher faded as he almost spoke to Zhang Chen with a lecturing tone. Let's disregard everything else. Just the seaweed cell-directed differentiation technology. Do you know how it would shake up the scientific field? Without any exaggeration, it would cause an earthquake in the biology academic world. Zhan Shuji let out a sigh. And that molecular filter? While I'm not studying organic chemistry, I can't say much, but I can be certain of one point. If our university lab had this, our ability to research in the chemistry field would increase substantially. So? Zhang Chen said emotionlessly. Zhan Shuji was dumbfounded before he realized. Even though he said that much, so what? It belonged to him, and if the Zhen government permitted the technology to exist in a private establishment's hands, everyone could take the technology away from him. I'm only a businessman, and you are my employee. You just need to remember this point. Since this technology belongs to me, I have the rights to decide where I should use it, Zhang Chen said nonchalantly. If the technology became public, it would undoubtedly cause unnecessary trouble. Therefore, in terms of production, Zhang Chen planned to keep the technology low-key. From the outside, the plant was only growing a type of sargassum, and the pharmaceutical plant would process the sargassum. Yes, Zhan Shuji said helplessly. Considering how disappointed Zhan Shuji looked, Zhang Chen walked up and patted him on the shoulder. Don't be disappointed. If you work diligently, maybe I will permit you to learn more about the top technology. Hopefully, one day that will happen. If I want to study the structure of the DH seaweed cell, would you mind? Zhan Shuji looked at Zhang Chen keenly. Of course not. I'll even sponsor you to build a lab here. Of course. This is on the condition that you follow the rules of the company and not take a single cell out of that door. Although he used a joking tone to say these words, he didn't look like he was joking at all. The two soldiers at the door were there to prevent thieves, both inside and outside. Don't worry, I'm only curious about how plant cells produce animal proteins. I can guarantee with my morale that I won't disclose what I see to any third parties, Zhan Shuji said. I trust you. Zhang Chen had no qualms about allowing Zhan Shuji to study it since it was impossible to reproduce it with current technological capabilities. Just like how no matter how much you observe the cells inside you, You could not produce them at will. Thank you. If I can't understand how it works, I might even lose sleep at night. Zhan Shuji looked at Zhang Chen graciously. Don't worry, I hope you can sleep well at night. Also, don't research during work hours. I will do it outside of work. Zhang Chen nodded, pleased. He hired people to work for him, not research the technology he possessed. Of course, if Dr. Zhan could achieve some inspiration from the research, it would still be beneficial to Zhang Chen. Since he signed the confidentiality agreement, Zhang Chen would not let him walk. After he took Zhan Shuji to the seaside mansion he would be living in, Zhang Chen spoke a few more words before he left. Currently, future biology was only an empty shell. Although the pharmaceutical plant was completed, the team responsible for marketing, strategy, and management had yet to be established. All this had to be finished. Although he could contract the work out to headhunters, he wanted to hire the individuals personally. Of course, if he left the work to Zai Ashu, he knew she would take it. But it wasn't nice, especially since she had a lot on her plate already with future technology. If he gave her something entirely unrelated to a tech company, he was afraid that she might be overworked. He took his private boat back to Koro Island and returned to the mansion that previously belonged to Johnny. When he purchased the mansion from the auction, the blood on the wall was already cleaned. The furniture was also replaced and the daunting bullet holes were filled in. Just from the appearance alone, the signs of a violent battle previously fought there were non-existent. Since it was a haunted house with people dead inside, out of filial respect, Zhang Chen would not make his parents live inside. But as a non-spiritual believer, Zhang Chen didn't mind making this mansion his own, at least until the mansion on New Moon Island was finished. He would live here. Then after the mansion on New Moon Island was completed, it wasn't a terrible decision to make this place into the Zen Revolution Museum and fool some tourists. When Zhang Chen walked into the kitchen, Aisha was cooking fish with an apron wrapped around her. A smile appeared on Aisha's usually expressionless face when she heard the footsteps from the door. Without turning her head, she said, "You're back." With the delicious smell of the dishes, all his worries were swept away as he approached the pot, drooling. "Looks like today is going to be a great meal. It'll be done soon." Aisha stirred the flavorful, thick soup with a spoon. The tip of her mouth curved up as she said tenderly, "I learned this from Aunt Lee. She said you really like to drink fish soup, so I wanted to try to make it. I miss the taste." Zhang Chen looked at the white fog rising as he exclaimed. He remembered when he was young, his father occasionally went fishing with his coworkers and his family would drink fish soup for 2 days. Now that he had money, he ate a lot of extravagant food. But this nostalgic feeling was hard to come by these days. The taste of freshwater fish and sea fish should be different. Greater than. Zhang Chen stared at the pot of soup as his mind drifted off. "If you like it, I can cook it for you every day," Aisha said in a quiet voice. Aisha, touched by her gentleness, Zhang Chen hugged her from behind. Aisha closed her eyes as she felt the warmness on her back. To be honest, Zhang Chen first just wanted to hug her, but he started to feel aroused as soon he touched her body. Aisha's face began to heat up as she felt the naughty hands wandering around her body. She turned around and rolled her eyes before she put down the spoon and set the heat to low. Although she acted timidly on the outside, when it was just the two of them, her passion was no less than Sun Zhao's. Just as Zhang Chen was prepared to investigate her body, the phone rang. The intimate atmosphere suddenly cooled off. Zhang Chen awkwardly took out his phone and prepared to pick up. But Aisha snatched the phone, threw it in the fruit basket, then kissed Zhang Chen and pressed him against the fridge. Just like a naughty sheep falling into the arms of the big bad wolf, the temperature began to rise again. The phone rang and rang. Chapter 356, Unknown Militants. Right now, inside the New Moon Island Command Center, the light on the screen flashed while 10 workers busily worked in front of the computer. On the big screen of the command center was a vessel with 400 tons of displacement. It had no flags and just a few people were on deck. It was the image captured by the Hummingbird drone. Based on the analysis, the destination of the vessel was Zin's New Moon Island. A month ago, Zhang Chen set up a wide-range life signal detector on the island to monitor the life signals within a 500-kilometer radius. The device was certainly useful in a sea territory. If it were set to the life signals of the fish, no fish would escape this device. The same would go for any human if it was set to detect humans. Since the technology was already mature on the wasteland, it wasn't hard for the fishbone workers to assemble an enhanced version. It was easy to censor one signal as a chip inside the EP could do the job. However, in the modern world, no one would escape the eyes of this device. Therefore, the technology widely used in the 22nd century for search and rescue became radar technology for Zhang Chen. As long as it wasn't drones, no living creature would escape its eyes. 10 minutes ago, the radar station detected the information of this vessel. It was a transportation vessel, but they caught the signal of 100 people on board. During this sensitive period of time, any of the vessels near their territory would be monitored. When the vessel was still 50 kilometers away from the border, after confirming that the vessel wasn't traveling through a standard international route, the soldiers at the command center first determined that the vessel may be smuggling goods, so they immediately contacted the patrol boat in the nearby territory and approached the ship. 10 minutes later, the vessel entered Zin's border. Then it adjusted its course and headed straight to New Moon Island under the cover of darkness. The patrol boat approached the vessel 4 kilometers away and attempted to enter the radio channel of the vessel. However, the vessel entered radio silence and ignored all communication attempts. The patrol boat, realizing the oddity of the situation, did not take the risk of approaching the boat but instead, released hummingbird drones. Under the night's veil, the drones flew across the ocean surface, approached the vessel suspected of smuggling, and entered the vessel. The image transmitted back shocked the entire command center. The boat didn't contain smugglers, but instead, fully equipped soldiers. The disguised sailors on deck were all equipped with pistols and wore bulletproof vests. There were a total of 100 unknown militants. The vessel was also equipped with landing boats and other military equipment. Other than the lack of country identification, it was a force no inferior to an actual army. Realizing the oddity of the situation, Ivan immediately ordered New Moon Island to enter combat-ready state. All soldiers were fully equipped and gathered at the airway, waiting for the order. Barkari put down the phone and looked anxiously at Ivan. Boss isn't picking up. He couldn't reach Zhang Chen. With Zhang Chen's C-grade genetic vaccine improved body, it would take at least 1 hour before he finished. Ivan silently looked at the screen in the command center. The vessel was approaching New Moon Island at high speeds. There was only 200 kilometers of distance between the enemy and the island. It only took a moment before they were 80 kilometers inside the border. Judging by the situation at hand, they came with not the friendliest intentions. The boss is purposely not picking up. Ivan seemed to have understood something as he told Barkari in an undertone. Purposely not picking up? Why? The black young man was puzzled. Boss provided us with the most advanced equipment and told us how to handle the situation. If we cannot even handle this small problem and have to call him every time, then I am not fit for the job of a commander. Ivan adjusted his hat as his stare on the vessel in the screen became more determined. The rumbling sound of helicopters breaking through the sea waves roared. 4 black shadows forming into a narrow formation headed to the vessel trespassing illegally. 4 lights shined from afar and lit up the deck of the vessel. When they realized they were discovered, the crew on deck all hid behind containers. With their reaction speed, their opponents were no ordinary men. Number 0371 vessel. Number 0371 vessel. We are the Coastal Guard of Celestial Trade. We suspect your vessel contains illegal goods. Please immediately stop and cooperate with the search. I repeat, please immediately stop and cooperate with the search. The 4 helicopters all opened the channel and broadcasted to the vessel, but the vessel seemed like it didn't hear anything as they continued to maintain their course. At the same time, inside the captain's room of the vessel, how is that possible? We closed all radio devices on board. How could they discover us 200 kilometers away? Captain Santos smashed the table. Sitting across him was Country F Lieutenant Galius. He remained silent. Half a month ago, They retired from their previous positions with the direction of the defense minister to enter the disguised mercenary force. Their mission was to execute a secret military mission named Revenge to punish the criminals who sunk the fishing boats. The political purpose of the mission was to demonstrate Country F's firm stance to the public. They pretended to be mercenaries to avoid the possible foreign affair problem that could arise by sending the actual army of Country F. In theory, the mission should not be difficult. The opponent was only a privately held security company. There was no way their combat abilities could surpass the elite soldiers who participated in joint military exercises. Based on the satellite image, although artillery bases were built on the island, no advanced artilleries were installed. Approach the island, stop the vessel, drop the landing boats, attack, retreat. With their plan, before the sun rose, they would escape at the port of Emilal Island and receive the recognition and praise from the defense minister. Someone leaked the mission details. Clues remained calm as he looked at the four bright dots with eyes narrowed. 200 kilometers distance. Even if the Aegis aircraft carrier used its array radar, it could only detect within a radius of 40 kilometers without any blind spots. It wasn't a technical limitation, but due to the curvature of the Earth, it was as difficult to detect a boat in the sea 200 kilometers away as pinpointing a piece of gold from the desert. Early warning aircraft, that's even more impossible. No country would sell it, especially to a private security company. What do we do? The captain remained cool. Leave it up to me. Clues picked up the assault rifle leaning on the table. With a wicked smile, he moved his neck and stretched his body before he headed out. Chapter 357, Battle on the Vessel. As the captain of this interception mission, Wilson stared at the disobedient vessel as gloom shadowed his face. No response, the deputy command said concisely and closed the broadcast outside of the helicopter. Prepare to drop the SEAL team. Roger. Wait, what is that? A few sailor-looking people ran in front of a container, pushed down the metal plate of the container, dragged out an anti-air machine gun with a belt on the bottom. It's an anti-air machine gun, the soldier sitting at the hatch of the Black Eagle yelled. At the same time, he raised the Reaper assault rifle and began to shoot at the deck. But because of the sea wind and far distance, it didn't hit anything. Stop, disperse formation. Immediately, Wilson roared into the radio. Roger. The four Black Eagle helicopters immediately ascended up to stop the forward motion and dispersed their formation. The two anti-air machine guns were set up and began to unleash its furious firepower at the four Black Eagles surrounding the vessel. But because of Wilson preemptively adjusted distance, the furious firepower didn't cause any injury to Celestial Trade. The bullets flew over 1,000 meters, losing its destructive power as it only left a trail of tiny dents on the Black Eagles. Its only purpose was to push the four helicopters 3 kilometers out. Weak. The Country F soldiers cursed, dragged up the cartridge, and inserted a new belt of bullets inside. Only a bunch of monkeys on the Pacific, and you dare to challenge us? Even who would have to respect us. You don't know your limit at all. The soldier spat on the deck as he looked at the four bright spots in the distance before he aimed the machine guns again. Although they retreated, the target of the helicopters remained locked on the vessel. Immediately 12 figures from the four helicopters jumped into the ocean. Soldiers wearing the K-1B type kinetic skeleton dived into the sea, opened their thrust, and transformed into 12 arrays of white bubbles. At the same time, under the veil of nightfall, no one noticed. Did they run away? A Country F soldier holding an assault rifle leaned against the container and grinned at his comrade. Ha ha, what would they do if they don't run? Be a target for us? Give me a cigarette. While he said this, another soldier took out a pack of cigarette and handed him one. Feels wet. He cursed and lit up one for himself and one for his comrade. At the same time, an unusual buzzing sound began to ring around the two. What is it? Ta-ta-ta. The bullets left a trail of holes on the two's body. The rifles dropped as four drones weaved through in the night. While they maintained their high speed, the machine gun underneath spat out bullets and unleashed its fury to the militants on deck. Area secured. Board the vessel. Roger. Hooks hooked onto the edge of the vessel, with the cover fire of the Hummingbird drones. 12 soldiers in amphibious kinetic armor immediately boarded the vessel and quickly ran to the back of the containers to secure a corner of the vessel. They began exchanging fire with the militants on the other side. "It's the SEAL team of Sin. Take them down." A Country F soldier disguised as a mercenary crawled behind cover. He shouted while firing back with his rifle. "Fouquet, what is that?" The drones freely weaved on the deck as it blended into the night sky. It would dash out from any angle and reap the lives on deck. "Damn it, what are these things?" Cluse fired with his rifle. He gritted his teeth. The light from the firing shined onto his distorted face. He didn't have the confidence he had before. Only intense fear remained. The plate-sized drones not only flew at the speed of a fly, it could also fire. He had seen a lot of advanced technology from the joint military exercises, but he had never seen such terrifying drones. He swore, not even the A possessed this. It only took a while before 10-something F soldiers fell down in pools of blood. But only 2 or 3 drones were shot down. They had never encountered such a lopsided battle. Push the machine guns onto the deck. Use heavy weapons. Afraid of more SEALs boarding, Cluse yelled into the earpiece as the battle entered turmoil. "Roger." A soldier roared while he lowered his body and ran to the back. Soon after, the anti-air machine guns were pushed onto the deck. The metal plate in the front blocked the incoming bullets. The machine gunner with a menacing laugh began firing at Zin soldiers in the distance. The bullets shredded the metal containers and suppressed the Zin soldiers from moving forward. Their success was short-lived as a rocket flew up, like an iron fist. It sent the anti-air machine gun into the sky. Along with it was the unlucky machine gunner. Cluse stared at the sky engulfed in flame. His eyes widened in disbelief. These SEALs brought rocket launchers. Cluse regained his attention from the shock and shouted into the radio. "Quick, move the machine guns back." But it was too late. Another rocket blew the other machine gun into pieces. Their anti-air power was destroyed. The 4 Black Eagles began to push forward. The pitch-black muzzles extended from the side of the helicopter. The arm-thick bullets fired from the side. The firepower from the sky revealed the militants hidden behind the containers as the F soldiers all dropped dead. With cover fire, the 12 soldiers first boarded stood up behind cover while they maintained their shooting position and pushed forward. They would make sure the remaining militants were finished off. As to the bullets, most were blocked by the polyethylene board. With the assistance of the drones, the militants had no fighting chance. "Fouquet, my hand." Cluse rolled inside the boat. He covered his broken right hand with his left hand. He tumbled and retreated to the bottom of the vessel. After confirming all enemy units were cleared on the deck, the soldiers entered the control room to stop the vessel. At the same time, the Black Eagles hovered above the deck as the ground force descended. 32 Celestial soldiers quickly entered the vessel. Wilson entered the control room and used the broadcasting system to speak to the resisting militants. "Surrender or die." The one-sided battle made all the F soldiers lose their courage to fight. When they reached 50% casualties, they finally collapsed and dropped the rifles in their hands and chose to surrender. Everyone was tied up and sent back to the deck. They waited with guns pointed at them. The vessel continued its journey to New Moon Island, but this time, the F soldiers disguised as mercenaries no longer had their original arrogance. The only emotions left were fear and despair. Chapter 358. Reparations. No secret can't be uncovered using a single truth-telling serum. If there was, then 2 truth-telling serums would suffice. The F soldiers were also certainly not soft, especially Cluse, who has lost one of his hand. He kept his mouth shut about this throughout, but with the truth-telling serum, mental fortitude was useless. Celebrate the glory of technology. 41 F soldiers were captured, and 59 soldiers died in the crossfire. Ivan treated the execution of this mission carefully. Not only did he leave radio communication records, but he also recorded the entire duration of the second warning, then the subsequent resist to cooperate, and the firing of anti-air machine guns was recorded by the cameras on the helicopters. Zhang Chen was extremely pleased with the way Ivan handled the situation. He needed a commander that would make the correct judgment in critical moments like this. rather than a follower that required his direction with any small problems. Sinking the boat that ignored their warnings was the command Jiang Chen had ordered when the life signal radar was established. All in all the evidence were there. Xin had the complete upper hand in the public's opinion. There was media coverage on soldiers pretending to be fishermen, but it was the first time they pretended to be mercenaries to conduct military action against other countries. What made it worse was that they were foolish enough to get caught. The international community spurred drastic reactions, including WHO. Multiple governments all denounced Country F for their unruly actions and the violation of international law. They stated that they would continue to follow the event closely. In the beginning, President Aquino and the defense minister continued to state that they were being framed by Xin, but following the release of 41 pleading guilty videos, along with the protest of the families from the 41 soldiers who had survived, the government completely went mute. The evidence was all out there, it was futile to defend themselves. Followed by the tradition of the country, they just would not admit to their actions. But Xin had said that if Country F does not give a satisfactory response, Xin will sentence all soldiers who had trespassed or made unlawful entrances into the country to over 30 years in prison. This forced Aquino into a corner. Continuing to not admit to being guilty, their soldiers definitely would not be able to return home, which meant that their families would be unhappy. But to apologize and plead to the Xin government to release the soldiers, Aquino didn't want to lose his face. The diplomatic relationship between the two countries entered a turmoil. But regardless who looked at it, in this round of exchanges, Xin had the complete upper hand. In the mansion on Coral Island, Zhang Yapin stood across from Jiang Chen on the sofa. Aisha poured them water before leaving the living room. Perhaps he was thirsty. Zhang Yapin took a sip of the water before he put the cup down. I have to thank you for making me so famous internationally. No worries. The oblivious Jiang Chen didn't grasp his sarcasm. No, I should worry about it. You killed 59 people this time. If they were not on the wrong side this time, I would be summoned to international court already. Haha, I realize you've become much more humorous. Jiang Chen laughed, making the best out of a worse situation. Zhang Yapin revealed a helpless expression. Okay, don't pretend to be so overdramatic. This event is great for you, Jiang Chen said. In what way? Zhang Yapin laughed. At least you don't have to worry about elections anymore. Jiang Chen crossed his legs as he sunk into the sofa, then he yawned. I don't understand much about politics, but after reading so many news articles, I have learned one rule. What's the rule? Zhang Yapin ridiculed. To increase support, strong foreign policy is much better than economic growth. Isn't that obvious? Zhang Yapin grinned. He initially thought Jiang Chen had a differing perspective, but what he said was common sense. Oh, looks like I accidentally discovered a principle in international relations? Jiang Chen laughed proudly. It was a bit tough on him to learn about managing a country as a mechanical engineer. To be honest, Jiang Chen has thought about becoming the president, but after careful consideration, he gave up on the idea. If he was really to become the president, he had a feeling he would turn the modern world into another apocalypse. The hidden figure was more suitable for him. It's still too early to say election. Who knows what will happen in 5 years? Don't worry, even if you don't have enough votes by that time, I will help you to become re-elected. Jiang Chen took a sip of his tea and said nonchalantly. Zhang Yapin raised his eyebrows but didn't say anything. Although he personally despised these unlawful actions, they were beneficial for him after all. After feeling conflicted, he remained silent. Jiang Chen glanced at the clock in the living room. When he saw it was getting late, he said, "Are you here to complain to me about this?" "Of course not." Zhang Yapin took out a piece of folded paper from his pocket. "I am here to talk about compensation." A total of 976 families were affected, totaling 2,115 people. Among them, a fair number of people lost their only home. They are currently residing in their friends' or relatives' place. Objectively speaking, President Zhang was unquestionably a great president. Even in a puppet regime, he still worked for the betterment of the citizens. 10% of the people are affected. That's a big problem. Let me think. Zhang Chen scratched his chin. Zhang Yapin quietly looked at Zhang Chen. He gulped and waited for his response. How about this? Provide me with detailed information about the people registered to receive compensation. To the people that lost their home, every family will be compensated with an apartment the size of 120 square meters, and the land will be compensated at $50 per square meter. For the people who lost their farming land, they will be compensated at $10 per square meter and be prioritized in the hiring process. What do you think about this compensation? Zhang Yapin's eyes widened, but he had to remind Zhang Chen, every family will be compensated with an apartment 120 square meters. What if someone lived in a 90 square meters apartment? Then they will thank me. Zhang Chen smiled. Zhang Yapin was amazed by Zhang Chen's words. He took a deep breath and expressed his gratitude sincerely. Okay, allow me on behalf of Xin's citizens to thank you for your generosity. No need. The reason why he was generous was not that he was a philanthropist, but he had other plans. The distribution of the Panu population was extremely uneven on the 9 islands. Most of the people were concentrated in the relatively developed Koro and Dange city. The remaining 7 islands had a large habitable area, but the population was extremely scarce. 10 square kilometers of land had less than 100 people inhabiting it. A store couldn't even thrive, let alone boosting the economy. This move was to reallocate the population density. These new apartments will not be built on Koro and Dange Island. As to the cost, it was not high to begin with an 8-floor high apartment building and 8 units per floor. There would be 64 units in the entire building. Even with 1,000 families, only 16 buildings would need to be built, with the land price and tax being negligible. The average cost of each building would be $100,000. It was nothing compared to Zhang Chen's assets. Also, he would gain a good reputation because of it, so why not? Speaking of prioritizing the hiring process, does your company have any positions available? Zhang Yapin continued. After the tourism facility is complete, it is expected to bring 80,000 jobs here, let alone lack of positions. I don't think the population here will be enough. Speaking of this, study the possibility of immigration and decide when to open the doors for that. Xin is currently politically unstable. No one would want to come here, Zhang Yapin said bitterly. Zhang Chen only smiled. That might not be true. Trust me, in less than 5 years, this place will become a destination the world longs for. A new land directed by Xin. I have to remind you, this place is only a series of islands, only for now. Zhang Chen emphasized the word now. Chapter 359, Purchasing Ores. Xin government remains firm on their stance and denounce Country F's shameless actions. Announcement states they will do everything to maintain the sovereignty and rights of the country. Daily Post. What's the source of audacity? How could the mysterious Celestial Trade defeat Country F's special force? Private force stronger than government army. The safety of the world is in jeopardy. Washington Post. Renren newspaper. The devil that cries war? Xin may be the disruptor of regional stability. Economic news. There were at least 10 newspapers on Zhang Chen's table, each displaying an interesting perspective, especially the economic news. They did a close-up of Zhang Yapin's distorted face. Zhang Chen wondered what he would think when he saw the image. As to the narratives, some remained neutral, some turned the topic domestic. Some favored a certain country while others disagreed. Of course, all the opinions were within Zhang Chen's expectation. Since something like this happened, Country F would be more cautious as to how this foreign relationship problem should be handled, and how they would use the international court platform as well as the 41 captives to scam Country F. It was President Zhang's worry. The door was knocked on gently. Come in, Zhang Chen said as he threw the newspapers into the corner. Aisha in a maid uniform walked in and put coffee in front of Zhang Chen's table. The white lace skirt, as well as the absolute territory hidden underneath the skirt, made Zhang Chen feel a bit thirsty. The reason why she wore this was not because it was Zhang Chen's fetish, but purely because Aisha wanted to. That's right, it was her hobby. Since they returned from Kane, Aisha developed a keen passion for pretty clothes, but because of her traditional perspective, she was unwilling to wear revealing clothes in front of other people. So the 5 full closets became her pajamas, and when there was no one home, Aisha's choice of clothing became odd. The maid uniform was okay, but sometimes she would wear a bikini to do chores, and wear only an apron to cook. "Thank you." Zhang Chen took the coffee. Aisha smiled back. Walking behind Zhang Chen, she gently massaged his shoulders. "You're working every day, take a break once in a while. Once everything is on track, I will be free." Zhang Chen put the cup down after taking a sip of his coffee, closed his eyes, and enjoyed Aisha's massage. Only if I could help you," Aisha said with slight disappointment. In her mind, she always thought women like Xiaxue was more ideal for Zhang Chen. Not only could she help him with his business, but her looks were also more suited to Asia's beauty standard. But other than the ability to kill as well as the apathy towards life, she had no other abilities. This was the reason why she wanted to drag Xiaxue to Zhang Chen's pillow side. "What are you saying? You have helped me a lot." Zhang Chen denied her statement without hesitation. Aisha didn't respond, but from her gentle smile, it looked like she was comforted. "I am planning to head to Australia at noon. Do you want to come along?" When she heard that Zhang Chen planned on taking her with him during this trip, Aisha happily curled up her lips. "Of course, let me go change." She then turned around and left. Steel is the foundation of the industrial industry, even in the highly advanced 22nd century. To develop industrial capability, raw materials were necessary, but the limitation of the wasteland's industrial capability was precisely the scarcity of raw materials. Although they could obtain aluminum, copper, iron, as well as other rare metals through recycling, the highly processed nature of the raw materials was not only cumbersome but was also costly. It was for this reason that the power armors had such a high cost. The special plastic steel covering the T3 power armor was not cheap. When he was back in the country, it was unrealistic to purchase large quantities of metal as it was much riskier than purchasing food. But now there were fewer concerns. He could buy whatever amount he desired, and no one would investigate him. The iron production of the world was controlled by 3 mega companies, the first being Brazil's Vale S.A with 39% of total production, ranking second was Rio Tinto and third being BHP, who accounted for 38% of total production. The first one was too far away in South America. The 2 latter ones were all in Australia with only New Guinea in between. Based on the consideration of cost, Zhang Chen chose BHP as his partner. There was only 1 flight to Melbourne. While there was an increase in the number of tourists, tickets remained plentiful as Aisha easily purchased them. When they arrived, they checked in at the same hotel. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Zhang." When he saw Zhang Chen, the Australian with a hooked nose extended his hand. "Nice to meet you too." Zhang Chen gave him a warm handshake. Oliver, one of the presidents of BHP. He was the acting executive director of the West Australia division. Compared with the mega company with a 210 billion market cap, Future International was just a small ant. Of course, no one would question the potential of the little ant, just like Microsoft in its early days. After a brief introduction, they were quick to head into the main topic. 100,000 tons of iron, 200,000 tons of aluminum, 1,000 tons of 45% purity molybdenum per month. Oliver scanned through the contract Zhang Chen handed over repeatedly as his eyebrows began to raise. The iron and aluminum are okay, but the molybdenum is a rare metal and production remains low. All of its production per year has been reserved. Oliver showed an apologetic expression. "I see." Zhang Chen raised his eyebrows. Molybdenum has a low reserve on Earth, accounting for only 0.001% of the mass of the crust, but it had a wide range of applications, such as microcomputers, microprocessors, offshore oil and gas pipelines, and even fertilizers. But a significant use of this was yet to be discovered. Mainly the neural connection of the virtual reality equipment to the human body must use this. Although they could acquire some through recycling in the apocalypse, to mass produce it, they would have to obtain it in the modern world. With molybdenum, I recommend you try your luck in Hua. Hua is the biggest producer of molybdenum right now. Iron and aluminum. Our company can provide. I'll see. Let's put the molybdenum aside for now and discuss the price of iron and aluminum, Zhang Chen said reluctantly. The Wang family would not let him purchase molybdenum easily. It was too easy to prevent him from buying the metal, from extraction to transportation, and customization. With the Wang family's power, a connection in any part of the system would easily stop him from doing business. Where could molybdenum be easily acquired from? Potentially places like Antarctica and the Moon. International treaty prohibited one of them, while the other one was unreachable by current technology. He would have to search for other means. Zhang Chen deliberated. Chapter 360. Sunny Melbourne. After an hour of negotiating contract prices and details, they finally reached an agreement. Iron ore, $52 and 20 cents per ton, 100,000 tons per month with a total cost of $5.22 million USD. Aluminum ore, $80 per ton, 200,000 tons per month with a total cost of $16 million USD. The total contract amount was $21.22 billion USD. The shipment would arrive from Port Darwin to Port Ange at the beginning of every month for 5 years. Although Ange Island currently has no deepwater port, Zhang Chen had already invested in its construction as 2 docks would be built by next month. The population base of Ange Island was relatively high and relatively far away from the other 8 islands. Therefore, it was ideal to be built into an industrial island with manufacturing as the dominating industry. Hence, a deepwater port was necessary. Oliver was ecstatic as he signed a multi-million-dollar deal in one afternoon for the company. After signing the contract, Zhang Chen didn't immediately leave but instead started to chat with him about the mining industry. To Zhang Chen's questions, Oliver did his best to answer. He told Zhang Chen the trend of the low volume of iron ore traded in 2016 and the decrease in price for rare metals. All the information could be found online, so it was not a secret. If you don't mind me asking this question, based on my knowledge, your company's primary business is in the tech industry. Why would you need to purchase large quantities of iron ore? Oliver asked. Your company has implications on what the buyer uses the ore for? Zhang Chen nonchalantly asked. Just a question I was personally curious about. Of course, if it is inconvenient to disclose, then that is okay. This question doesn't affect our partnership. Oliver saw that Zhang Chen didn't plan to answer as he smiled to apologize for his rather blatant question. I do apologize. This is a trade secret, and I can't answer you. To express my apology, allow me to treat you to dinner, Zhang Chen said. Haha, it's my honor. I know a pretty good restaurant in Melbourne. Take my car. Oliver gladly accepted Zhang Chen's invitation. It was time to get off work. They left the company and headed to a Brazilian barbecue restaurant near Melbourne. From the restaurant's aesthetics, it was no different than the street food stalls found in Hon. The half-open system design with a distinctly not Brazilian owner roasting the golden slices of meat on the fire drew the passers-by with its delicious aroma. They sat at the bar, and it didn't take long before the plates arrived in front of them. 2 cold beers and 4 plates of meat later, Zhang Chen was thrilled by the food. Is the future of the mining industry not looking so good? Not terrible. But it will get worse. When they spoke about work, Oliver let out a sigh. Because of the economic conditions, it could be categorized as an economic issue, but ultimately it goes back to demand. Oliver took a big gulp of beer in satisfaction. The beer washed away the frustration that accumulated in his chest. Could you be more specific? With the skewer in his hand, Zhang Chen asked. He had an interest in mining. For example, if you want to build a 5,000 square meter building, it would require 30 tons of steel. But once the building is complete, the potential market of the steel would decrease by the 30 tons. Not only in infrastructure, but from vehicles to screws, they are all the same. Then, the steel plant would decrease production, the mining output would also decrease. And that's how the economy goes down the drain. Oliver laughed. Zhang Chen didn't know what was funny. Is it okay to tell me this? No problem. I'm off work, Oliver said with confidence. Also, even if there are layoffs, I won't be cut. Therefore, The overall trend of iron is going down. That's right. In 2008, per ton had a price of $2.10. Now, it would be lucky to get 95 US cents. With what you are saying, there is no hope in the mining industry? Zhang Chen grinned. Not necessarily true. There is potential if there is a technological breakthrough. Oliver shook his beer glass half filled with beer. Technological breakthrough. Zhang Chen raised his eyebrow. That's right. Unless there is a major technological breakthrough, such as everyone throwing away their current vehicle. Like how everyone gave up on the hand-operated machines, or like how everyone abandoned the steam engine. If we were to stretch the example, sigh, I am pretty envious of you. There are a lot of people envious of me. I am not talking about your money, but your industry. Don't you think that tech is the field that technological breakthroughs are most likely to occur in? Oliver stuffed a skewer into his mouth and then smiled. It is also the industry most likely to go bankrupted. Zhang Chen mocked. Oliver took a moment to process this before he started to laugh hysterically. Maybe laughing was contagious, for Zhang Chen also began to laugh along. The two hysterical people made the rest of the restaurant turn their heads. When Zhang Chen returned to the hotel somewhat drunk, it was already 10 at night. That guy was surprisingly talkative and was very humorous as well. Zhang Chen and him talked about the culture of Australia, the barbecued fish, and even his hometown Yukon. They got along so well that while they ate and drank, it was already deep into the night. Before they left, Zhang Chen exchanged business cards with Oliver. When Zhang Chen, still drenched in the smell of alcohol, appeared in front of the door, Aisha quickly helped him to the bathroom, took off his shirt, and wiped his body with a hot towel. Why did you drink so much? Aisha muttered to Zhang Chen in a small voice. I met an interesting person. Zhang Chen burped and laughed. Then he leaned on Aisha's chest. Aisha's pale skin instantly turned red. Just as she was about to help Zhang Chen stand up, snoring sounds resonating from the bathroom. It felt terrible to be hungover, but with Zhang Chen's metabolic speed, he only felt awful for a short period the next day before he fully recovered. Because the contract negotiation went surprisingly smooth, he had a lot of free time the next day. Since everything was done, based on Zhang Chen's promise to Aisha, he took her to explore Melbourne. Photos in front of landmarks, shopping in major malls. It was tiring to shop with a woman, but with Aisha's joyous expression in front of him, Zhang Chen felt all of his weariness wash away. The last destination of the trip was St. Patrick's Cathedral. Although it was odd to view an religious building as someone of a different religion, Aisha's amazement surveying the magnificent cross astonished Zhang Chen. Not all religious people are stubborn, and not all stubbornness cannot be forgiven. At the peak of the modern-day secularization, even an atheist can hold the hands of a believer and praise the glory of the art of the pagan church. 700 years ago, the Crusaders fought for the ownership of Holy Land through a bloodbath. 70 years ago, the US and Soviet let the Iron Curtain drop due to differences in ideology. Now looking back, nothing seems unforgivable nor unacceptable by the law of nature. Just like the uncanny workmanship of the Suzhou Gardens and the vibrancy of the stained glass at the Notre Dame de Paris, the shape and color the world should possess were far more than what people would think. If one day, the footstep of humans expanded to the edge of the galaxy, if they look back on the territory conflicts of today, and the ideology differences, would they mock themselves for their past actions? But by that time, what would civilization be bothered by? The path to evolution, or other things? Just as Zhang Chen thought about this, Aisha gently pulled on his arm. He recollected his thought and looked at her. I want to go in. Is that okay? Of course. He threw his thoughts into the back of his head and nobly held on to Aisha's tiny hand. They both headed inside the St. Patrick Cathedral. Chapter 361. Meeting an old friend. Rather than a church, it was more like a museum. The church had religious text that could be read, but it had no souvenirs, perhaps indicating it was a sacred place rather than a tourist attraction. But because today was not worship day, there was no one praying in the church. Inscriptions on shrines told the vicissitudes history of the Catholic Church. Zhang Chen held Aisha's hand while he briefly glanced around. Is this a Gothic-style building? Aisha with one finger on her lips looked up at the magnificent dome. Should be? I don't really know. Why? Zhang Chen asked. Because I often see Gothic-style clothing in the magazines, with the tip of her lips forming a curvature. I think it's cute. Haha, but this building doesn't resemble cuteness. Zhang Chen forced a laugh and scanned his surrounding. A priest stood under the altar with a couple standing in front of him. The white-haired priest drew a cross in front of his chest and blessed the two. Aisha noticed that the couples had a joyous smile on their faces when they left. What are they doing? Receiving the blessing of the holy light? The couple should be praying or marrying or something. Zhang Chen made something up. The priest seemed to have noticed the two looking at him. He kindly smiled and walked to them. Do you need help with something? Considering Aisha's religion, Zhang Chen wanted to refuse, but the girl blinked her eyes and looked at the elderly father with white hair. Even as a pagan, is the blessing effective? The question was blatant, but the priest only paused for a moment before he spoke with an earnest expression. Of course, it all depends if you love him or not. Aisha's cold expression bloomed into a joyful smile. I love him dearly. Zhang Chen felt teary. Aisha's honest but innocent confession made him feel a different emotion. He never admitted that he was a good man, not because he was greedy. He just never had a strong mental fortitude. The priest looked at Zhang Chen. His eyes seemed to possess the ability to observe everything. Then, do you love her? I love her, Zhang Chen said affirmatively. Aisha's eyes welled up with tears. She hugged Zhang Chen's arm and rubbed her face against it. If he had one positive trait, it would be that he never lied about his emotions. Although there was the suspicion of being a quibble, Zhang Chen didn't plan to explain anything. A smile appeared on the priest's face. May the Lord bless you, and you will be happy. He drew the cross and blessed them. When they came out of the church, Aisha angled her entire body weight on Zhang Chen's arm, and her expression was exuberant. Among the trees, white roses blossomed along the path, but in front of her perfect smile, it paled in comparison. It was rare for her to display such intimacy in public. With how happy she looked, Zhang Chen couldn't resist kissing her tender face. The face gradually turned red as a spoiled smile surfaced on his face. When night began to fall, Zhang Chen prepared to take Aisha back to the hotel. They still needed to catch tomorrow's plane, so they should sleep early. That's right, sleep early. But at the same moment, Zhang Chen heard a familiar voice in surprise. Fi, marry me? A man with roses kneeled in front of a gorgeous-looking girl as he said with deep affection. But the proposal in front of the church didn't seem to move the girl. Didn't we agree that once you settle, we'll then talk about marriage? Yang Yuan? Zhang Chen followed the voice as he looked at the man beside the bench. He didn't expect to encounter his university roommate here. After graduation, the four roommates all chose different paths. While they contacted each other initially for the few months, with the formulation of their new circles, the four rarely contacted each other. Even if Zhang Chen had made a name for himself, the three people still didn't contact him. As to why, Zhang Chen made sense of it quickly, most likely because they didn't want to lose face. Not speaking with people when they are down, and flattering them once they are successful, it didn't sound good, especially since their relationship was not deep, to begin with. In addition to the lack of contact 2 years after graduation. Since the three all valued their face, they didn't contact Zhang Chen. Without contact, at least they could brag to their friends and coworkers, "That guy, we lived in the same dorm. I was tight with him." Zhang Chen still remembered Yang Yuan. Although they were not in the same major, they had a surprisingly good relationship. He was the study god of their dorm and had a good family background. Zhang Chen faintly recalled that after graduated he headed to a renowned university in Australia for a master program. Before he left, he told Zhang Chen to find him if he ever visited Australia and that he would treat him. Of course, Zhang Chen knew it was just out of courtesy. Now thinking back, 2 years passed by and his master should be completed. Since they didn't contact each other after he left, their relationship obviously began to fade. While it was not the first time Zhang Chen was in Australia, he didn't remember to go find him. But today's encounter, the feeling of meeting an old friend in a different part of the world, was indescribable. Zhang Chen just wasn't sure if it would be appropriate to say hi. Give me some more time, I will definitely find a job. Yang Yuan was a bit anxious as he didn't know what to do. Did you consider my feelings? You said you were already settled here, so I quit my job in China to find you, but what now? The girl said accusingly with her eyes turning red. When he saw his old friend was in a tough situation, Zhang Chen let out a sigh and walked toward him in an attempt to make the situation less awkward. Yang Yuan? When he heard someone call his name, Yang Yuan first paused for a moment. When he saw who it was, he shouted in surprise. Brother Chen, haven't seen you in a while. Due to astonishment, his voice cracked. Haven't seen you for a while. Zhang Chen smiled. This is your significant other? Yang Yuan looked at Aisha. Aisha, she briefly introduced herself. You still recognize me? The smile on Yang Yuan was a mixture of bitterness, excitement, and joy. The person they didn't believe in now became a big boss, and the person everyone thought highly upon now couldn't even find a job. The discrepancy made him feel a bit bitter, but the joyful news was, his old friend still recognized him. Chapter 362, Future Mining. Of course, I still remember. I owe you 2 cup noodles. Zhang Chen recalled their past. Don't mention it. Yang Yuan rubbed his nose out of embarrassment. I always said that I will treat you to lobster. Now that you are so well off, I'm so embarrassed to say it. You are Zhang Chen? Zhang Chen noticed that the girl beside Yang Yuan looked at him in excitement. Stars were shining in her eyes. Zhang Chen felt that he had seen her before. Is it an illusion? Whatever. That's right. Zhang Chen laughed and turned to Yang Yuan. Is this your significant other? Because Zhang Chen's generation is defined by the single-child policy. During university, they casually referred to each other as brothers, while their girlfriend as brother's significant other. I am Suf, a fan of Little White, Suf said while blinking her eyes. Yang Yuan's expression was somewhat awkward. Zhang Chen sensed that he didn't want to speak too much on this as he diverted the topic. It's rare to see you. How about I'll treat you to dinner? No, I said I would treat you. It's okay. I'm just repaying for the 2 cup noodles. Zhang Chen interrupted Yang Yuan. He could see that Yang Yuan's economic situation was not too great. He only wanted to find a way for them to catch up. If he burdened his old friend, it would be against his original intention. Oh, okay. Yang Yuan saw Zhang Chen's intention and nodded. They arrived at a restaurant by the sea. From the exterior design, it was easy to see the luxury of this restaurant as well as the extravagance of the price. Yang Yuan's expression was unnatural when he looked at the servers in suits. But with how happy his girlfriend was, he didn't have the heart to tell Zhang Chen to change a place. When he saw Zhang Chen didn't look pained or dissatisfied, he finally felt relieved. He was worried that Zhang Chen would have the idea that I haven't seen you for a long time and you want me to pay for a big meal, but the worry seemed extraneous. He also had a headache due to the wayward and extravagance of his girlfriend, but he couldn't bring out the courage to restrain her. Yang Yuan was obviously face-palming. Zhang Chen was not stingy to the point where he wouldn't pay for a meal. On the dinner table, other than Aisha not speaking too much, the other 3 had a great conversation. Suf continually proposed a toast to Zhang Chen to demonstrate her energetic side, but at the same time subconsciously or consciously began asking about his private life. However, Zhang Chen managed to divert the questions smoothly. Zhang Chen has seen too many similar situations. Although he didn't know why his old friend would like a woman like this, he still had his own boundaries. Therefore, he maintained his distance with Suf. Seeing that her attempt to get close was unsuccessful, Suf put her attention on Aisha and tried to befriend her. But to her warmness, Aisha was unmoved. Yang Yuan seemed to be slow in this area as he didn't sense anything. After downing a few beers, he began chatting about what happened after graduation. Because he was drunk, Yang Yuan dragged him to the balcony of the restaurant. With the refreshing sea breeze sweeping across their face, They continued to chat. It didn't take long before the conversation changed to the start of the company. Zhang Chen selectively skipped the sensitive topics and summarized the process of creating Future 1.0 and only spoke about the details of when the company started to become successful. Damn, the prom queen of the business school, Xiaoshu, you managed to date her. Wow, this Brother Chen title is certainly deserving. Yang Yuan exclaimed in a loud voice laced with drunkenness. What do you mean? Zhang Chen joked. She is the CEO of my company, but our relationship might be a bit different. There weren't as many concerns when men spoke to each other. But isn't that your Tato? Zhang Chen was a bit awkward. She is too. So corrupted. Yang Yuan took a long time to process his words before he punched Zhang Chen on the shoulder. Ahem. We like each other. It is not being corrupt. Let's not talk about this. Speaking of you, what's going on with Suf? Yang Yuan let out a sigh. Nothing's going on, just like this. I feel like I have seen her before. She is also a graduate of Wanghai University, 2 years younger than me. I only asked her to come abroad at the end of last year. You probably have seen her in school. Yang Yuan said nonchalantly. I see, could be. I originally thought that I got a metal bowl, referring to a stable job, but I didn't even take a scoop out of it before I lost the bowl. I should have just signed when PetroChina interviewed me. There was regret in Yang Yuan's words. Although state-owned enterprises' salary was lower compared to foreign companies, the stability was undoubtedly a plus. Even if it were operating at a loss and heavily subsidized, the government would not allow the workers who worked diligently to contribute to the country to lose their job. Just from this point again, it was more virtuous than working for the capitalists. A metal bowl. Yes, in the first year of my master's in Australia, I already signed with Rio Tinto. But this year, the mining industry was not looking pleasant. Combined with the oil price plunging, Rio Tinto immediately began laying off people. So I, unfortunately, became a casualty. Certainly unlucky, Zhang Chen said in his mind. Does PetroChina not want you anymore? Of course they do. Why not? I am a master's student who studied abroad majoring in resource exploration. With my family connection, I will be promoted in just 2 years. Yang Yuan was still confident with his own ability. Then why don't you go back? Zhang Chen glanced at him. A bitter smile surfaced at Yang Yuan's face. I want to go back, but... As he spoke, Yang Yuan turned to look at Suf in the restaurant. That girl was dissecting the lobster in excitement while chatting with Aisha. Zhang Chen instantly understood his bitterness. She didn't want me to go back. From her perspective, now that I finally acquired immigration status, it would be a waste if I let that go. Whenever I talk about going back, she would cry and threaten to break up with me. Is it good like this? Zhang Chen asked. To be honest, Zhang Chen didn't like Suf's personality. He didn't know what was attractive about this type of girl. But since Yang Yuan likes her, he couldn't say anything. What could I do? Yang Yuan's bitterness deepened. Do you love her? He didn't know that the engineer was such a devoted person. Back then, Zhang Chen just thought he was unexpressive. He didn't think he had this quality. Then try to satisfy her, though it might be an endless pit. Yang Yuan let out a sigh. I know. I just want to wait until tomorrow. If the market picks up again, there will be demand for employment. Zhang Chen fell into deep thought as he listened to Yang Yuan's words. To be honest, he happened to be worried about molybdenum. Other than molybdenum, niobium ore, tungsten ore and even rare metals all have a big gap in the wasteland. But based on what Oliver said, those ores would be hard to obtain in any country. So Zhang Chen had the idea to extract them himself. Panu Island's ocean resources were extremely vast and rich. While no oil and gas existed in its territory, the mining deposits underneath the sea were yet to be explored. It would be hard to believe if there were not a single bit of deposits in the vast ocean territory. Since iron and aluminum had a low cost, Zhang Chen didn't mind paying. But for rarer metals, if he were to buy, it would certainly pain him. As to how to extract the ores from the seafloor, Zhang Chen already had an idea in mind. though it still remained in the research phase. Could the deposit distribution of the apocalypse be the same as the modern world? Jiang Chen never thought about this before, because the history of the two worlds was completely different. He selectively ignored the possibility of using the information from the future to his advantage. Lottery, the amount and number might even be different. Suck up to future leaders? Pack never existed. Music? That's more absurd. Would India's pop music be popular in China? If not, then the music from Pack would be the same. But mining resources were different. It would not change because of human activity. Therefore, the mining beds dug clean before the war may not have even been drilled or explored yet. The more Jiang Chen thought about it, the more he wanted to hit himself for not thinking about this earlier. Selling ores and oil location would be much more profitable compared to gold, just that it would be hard to explain the source. Speaking of this, I happen to have a job. Are you interested? Yang Yuan shook his head. I don't know tech at all, thank you. But I will not bother you. Yang Yuan was an honest person. He knew he didn't have any ability in that area. Who said I wanted you to go to future technology? Asking an exploration major to do tech, it would be asking for trouble. Jiang Chen rolled his eyes. I am talking about future mining. Are you interested? Future mining? Yang Yuan was shocked. That's right, Jiang Chen said affirmatively. Although he could just hire a headhunter to do it for him, he trusted the people he knew more. As to technology, the one thing he never lacked was technology. Are you being serious? Yang Yuan put on a stern expression. Of course, but do you know anything about sea exploration? When he talked about his major, Yang Yuan immediately turned ecstatic. Yes, my professor at the university is researching sea exploration, whether it is space mining deposits or space oil deposits. I have studied both. Then let's do this. I will go back to Xin and register future mining, MHMM. I will also register one in Australia. Jiang Chen nodded. What, you haven't registered that company yet? Yang Yuan face-palmed. 1. Metal Bowl, a stable job from a state-owned enterprise. Chapter 363, Return. Yang Yuan's contract was negotiated immediately after. Although he was skeptical with Future International entering the mining sector, he didn't question the truth of Jiang Chen's words. It must be true. Would a billionaire trick a poor guy just for fun? Yang Yuan accepted the job without a second thought. He would get a monthly salary of 10,000 odd with a bonus based on sales. Although Yang Yuan expressed that he didn't need that much, Jiang Chen still insisted on giving him a high salary. One reason being that he wanted to help his old friend. The other reason was to reinforce their relationship. It was always the better deed to help someone in need rather than add on to their success. For example, it was far more meaningful to drag him up when his career and relationship were at their worst rather than giving him a raise when he had a salary of over 100,000. In the beginning, when Soof heard that Yang Yuan would work for Future International, she was naturally very excited. But when she heard the work was in a place called Banu Islands beside New Guinea, her face immediately turned sour. Then she heard she could live in a mansion by the beach with a salary of 10,000 odd with flights back to Australia for vacation covered by the company. She became happy again, her mood changing as fast as a summer storm. Jiang Chen didn't know what to say. Since Yang Yuan liked her, he couldn't do anything about it. The dinner cost 1,000 Australian dollars, which Jiang Chen paid before taking off. Yang Yuan would report to him at Coral Island 5 days later, so it was his job to register the company in Australia in the next 5 days. Future Technology, Future Biology, Future Mining, the 3 subsidiaries meant that Future International finally had the umbrella of an international conglomerate. In the future, Jiang Chen planned to establish Future Heavy Industrial, Future Communication and allow Future International to expand in all areas of human economic activity. Of course, he had to take it one step at a time. Did you have fun today? On their way back, Jiang Chen tousled Aisha's hair and asked. Very fun. Whenever she recalled the blessing in the church and his I love her, a curvature known as happiness would surface on Aisha's lips. We'll head back tomorrow. Is there anything you want to do or any place you want to go? There's still some time before it gets completely dark. No need. With a blushing face, Aisha moved her eyes into the distance. Let's go back now. Is she tired? Zhang Chen initially didn't understand the meaning behind Aisha's words. It was only when the door of the hotel room closed that he personally experienced the passion hidden underneath her coldness. Only the soaked sheets told the intimacy of the night. The next day, they boarded their returning flight to Xin and got off the plane on Koro Island. After he settled down the wary Aisha, Zhang Chen left the mansion and headed to the nutrient supply plant located on Ange Island. It was the hottest time of the day, and the workers at the plant were all on break, but Zhan Shuji still stayed in the lab and carefully examined DHC weed cells under the microscope. He didn't even notice Zhang Chen standing behind him. Did you discover something meaningful? Zhang Chen sighed with a helpless expression. No. Zhang Shuji shook his head in honesty. He researched this for over half a month, yet he was still without any clue. He didn't know how the mechanism worked. It's normal for you to not make sense of it. If you could understand it in this short period of time, the technology would be worthless. The RNA transcribed from the single-stranded DNA doesn't match the DNA, a protein found in an animal cell divided in a plant cell. How does this work? Zhan Shuji's eyes shined with frenetic flames as he asked Zhang Chen. Don't look at me like that, I'm only a merchant, it wasn't me who researched this technology. Zhang Chen shivered at the thought of a man watching him like that. Could I meet him? No. Zhang Chen rejected it without any room for compromise. To Zhang Chen's surprise, he thought Zhan Shuji would insist on meeting the scientist, but after being rejected, he only sighed. Okay, I thought I reached the boundaries of science, but it looks like I don't know anything after all. Such astonishing technology exists in this world. Did you know this is like an art? Zhan Shuji took off the glass under the microscope as he praised its magnificence. Art? It's that valuable? Considering what he said, Zhang Chen was afraid now. Nutrient supply is going to be sold to the masses if people start examining it with microscopes. But thinking about it more deeply, he rejected the possibility. Cells could not pass through the molecular filter, and that thing filtered at the particle level. Valuable? Zhan Shuji shook his head. It's not just valuable. Do you know what it means to be able to produce animal protein from plant cells? What does it mean? It means that beef could grow from the ground. Zhang Chen laughed. Even in the 22nd century, it was pure fiction to grow beef from the ground. Let's not talk about these irrelevant things. I'm just here to grab some samples. Zhang Chen interrupted him. Although Zhan Shuji was displeased with Zhang Chen's choice of words, he knew his place. He was still his boss. So he went to the bench and picked up a nutrient supply pack containing 10 tubes. This is it. It tastes weird. Would people even want to drink this? Zhan Shuji ridiculed. Zhang Chen began laughing. You don't understand. You're underestimating women's determination to pursue beauty. They could starve themselves for a few days if necessary, so this is nothing, especially since this doesn't taste that bad. After he left Zhan Shuji, Zhang Chen took a boat back to Koro Island. He got off at the port as he headed straight to the Celestial Trade Corporation's warehouses near the port. He calculated that he was away from the wasteland for 2 months already. While he did occasionally travel back to meet with Sun Zhao, visit Yao Yao, and tease Lin Lin, he never stayed for too long. He wanted to test the sample at the fallout shelter to see if there were any errors on the production side, but on the other hand, he needed to grow his force on the wasteland. Provided with the resources of the modern world, limitations on the Apocalypse's industrial capabilities would be removed entirely. He closed the door of the warehouse and put on the bracelet Lin Lin gave him. Zhang Chen took a deep breath, staring at the small mountain of food. Storage dimension activated. Chapter 364, Return to the Apocalypse. Storing all the food? He didn't need to move an inch, but the supply of food in the warehouse slowly depleted. With the interdimensional mass teleportation device, it was much easier to transport goods to the Apocalypse. When he had to constantly travel back and forth, not only was it inefficient, but it made him feel dizzy and it wasted more crystals too. Now, it was a much easier process. After 10 minutes passed and 1,000 crystals used, Zhang Chen emptied 2 warehouses full of supplies. The capacity of the storage dimension seemed to have hit some bottleneck and stagnated at 30 cubic meters. Regardless of how many crystals Zhang Chen used now, he couldn't expand it by even a cubic millimeter. Zhang Chen didn't mind since 30 cubic meters of space was plenty for him. Perhaps the bottleneck could be broken by a future opportunity, so he didn't worry. He left the warehouse and called Aisha. Soon after, Aisha drove to the warehouse with the Lamborghini. From the exhaustion on her face, she evidently had yet to recover from last night. "Are you feeling bad?" Zhang Chen asked caringly as he sat in the car. Are you planning to head to that side?" Aisha acutely saw through Zhang Chen's thoughts. "I'm planning to take care of something on that side. Let's go back to the mansion. Be safe." Zhang Chen paused before a smile emerged. When he returned to the mansion, Zhang Chen changed his clothes. Just like his usual routine, he laid on the bed, closed his eyes, and commenced travel. Behind his back was still the soft bed, but the oppressive radiation dust outside the window told him explicitly that he wasn't in the peaceful modern world anymore. He stood up, and before he managed to gain his balance, ferocious footsteps came from behind the door. Sun Jiao pushed open the door, dove into Zhang Chen's chest and pushed him back onto the bed. "I missed you." She rubbed her face against Zhang Chen's shoulder. "Honey, it's not like I haven't been back before." Zhang Chen stroked her silky hair and hugged her. Just like a cat, she escaped Zhang Chen's hug agilely. Sun Jiao sat on the chair and looked at Zhang Chen. "How long do you plan to stay?" "Probably for a while. Also, how did you know I was coming back?" A proud smile appeared on Sun Jiao's face. "I heard sounds coming from the warehouse in the backyard and they continued for a while. When I checked it out, I saw a bunch of stuff appear. So I thought you must be preparing to come back." "How have you been?" "Very well, or rather, too well." With her chin against the back of the chair, Sun Jiao exclaimed. To be able to live such a comfortable life was unimaginable before. It was 2 months until an entire year passed after meeting Zhang Chen. This year was the happiest she'd been since she left the fallout shelter. Although a lot of things happened during the process, they managed to make it through intact. Just like a miracle, the soil tainted by war welcomed order again. After he said hi to Yao Yao, Lin Lin, and Sun Ziru, Zhang Chen headed to the warehouse in the backyard. This place was previously the base's warehouse, and now it was modified into a building similar to a transport array. 2 old warehouses were bulldozed and built into a metal shed around 500 square meters big. Inside contained the magnified version of the interdimensional mass transportation device Lin Lin designed. Right now, the warehouse was filled with containers of canned food, fresh vegetables, fruit, and meat. Zhang Chen sent Wang Qin a message on the EP, directing 15 workers from the logistics department to transport the food. Last quarter, we produced 2,000 Reaper assault rifles, 400 Hummingbird drones, 20 Type 50 electromagnetic pulse cannons, 10 T3 power armors, and 1 sample T4 power armor. Wang Qin pushed up her glasses as she reported to Zhang Chen the recent production figures. "The T4 power armor is finished?" Zhang Chen was surprised. The defense ability of the T3's armor was something Zhang Chen always criticized. While the front armor was enough to defend against light weapons, it was nowhere enough in a battle against the Deathclaw. Zhang Chen demanded that the new model had to replace the plastic armor with the more durable C-type steel without sacrificing mobility. Just like he expected, the problem that couldn't be solved by researchers at 6th Street was no trouble for the scientists at the Fallout shelter. The difficulties with the engine were solved by researchers at the Fallout shelter. The improved crystal fuel rod increases energy efficiency by 20% and engine output by 15%. This solves the problem of lack of mobility. The weight of the armor was increased to 700 kilograms to reach the threshold for land-type power armor specs. The total defense increased by 50% while ammunition decreased by 10%. What about the attached weapon models? It still has the revolving machine gun on the left arm as the primary weapon. But based on this, The researchers at the fallout shelter also added a 5-round grenade launcher on the same side. The grenade is capable of heat-seeking. It was a moving fortress. Insane. But I like it, Zhang Chen thought to himself. What are the weaknesses compared to T3? While the front armor is reinforced more strongly, the armor in the back has been decreased. Also due to the weight of the armor, the acceleration provided by the engine is weaker compared to before. It can't perform the high-mobility dodging maneuvers T3 could. It may feel unresponsive when dodging anti-armor weapons, so our research added reactive nitrogen armor on 4 different sections of the T4 power armor. Improving its defense meant sacrificing its mobility, but it was a worthwhile sacrifice, since not all people could perform the dodging action in less than 0.1 seconds. Most of the soldiers in power armor would require the armor to take damage directly and act as a moving shield for the light infantry. It was the role power armor played in combat. What's the cost of producing a T4? Wang Qin's finger pressed on the screen and a number appeared in the center. 27,130 crystals. That's so expensive. Zhang Chen was shocked by the figure. It was almost 3 times the amount compared to T3 armor. But Wang Qin couldn't do anything about that fact. The price of iron and rare metal continues to climb at the 6th Street to the point where there's a shortage. Based on the information provided by Chunan, although there's been an economic boom as well as other factors, there's also been an increase in the number of scavengers. So there's still a significant gap to meet industrial demands. Chapter 365, Virtual Reality Online. Fishbone Base's metal resources primarily depended on imports from the 6th Street. With the influence of the economic boom last fall as well as the formation of the bank at the year's end, countless factories emerged. The garbage dumps left unmanaged for many years were swept clean by all the major factories. After the hunters that hunted for crystals and mercenaries that protected trade routes, professional scavengers became the hottest profession at the 6th Street. This was unfathomable before because no one imagined that so many factories would emerge at the 6th Street practically overnight. The current production capacity of the base is restricted by the lack of raw materials. A lot of scavenging teams already signed a contract with the factories. Although I suggested Chunan to forcefully purchase the resources that Fishbone Base requires at a premium, he rejected the proposal. He said that unless you made the decision, he wouldn't interfere with the contract between private companies and scavengers. Wang Qin sighed. What he did was right, Zhang Chen said. Chunan was undoubtedly an interesting individual, although he was just a pilot. It was surprising that they shared a similar thought process. One trait that most survivors shared on the wasteland was that the moment they saw something nice, they would steal it. This was the reason why most people spent their life picking through garbage. Of course, looking at the question from another perspective, the actions of the survivors were reasonable. Due to the scarcity of survival resources, they might not even be able to survive without robbing others. Wang Qin looked at Zhang Chen, not understanding. From her perspective, they were already nice enough to purchase the supplies at a premium. At least they weren't trying to rob them. Fishbone Base was the controller of the 6th Street. Didn't they have the authority to do whatever they wanted? Only freedom and goodwill can inject the long-lasting energy needed for the 6th Street's economic growth. We would only lose credibility if we attempted to interfere with the economy and its supporting industry, and to a regime like ours, the latter is obviously more important than the former. She didn't understand what the boss said, but she thought it was deep. That was what Wang Qin's expression showed. Credibility. What's the purpose of that? Too useful. Zhang Chen laughed. Let's not talk about this. How much iron and aluminum are we missing? Just give me a list. These 2 resources will no longer be imported from the 6th Street. I will solve the problem myself. You can obtain iron? Wang Qin's eyes widened in disbelief as she couldn't hide her surprise, but she was quick to realize her rudeness as she covered her mouth with her hands to express her remorse. Zhang Chen didn't mind and answered with a casual voice. That's right, I can transport it starting next month. I can't solve the problem with the rare metals though, so see if you have any solutions." She pushed up her glasses as the surface reflected a cunning spark. "Let the scavengers of the base take care of it. We should give up on recycling iron and aluminum and shift our focus to electronic equipment and high-precision devices. These things contain a higher amount of rare metal." I'll leave it up to you." Zhang Chen nodded. Transportation of goods into the warehouse was almost complete, so Wang Qin saluted before she left. As it was getting late, Zhang Chen took a big stretch before returning to the mansion. He needed to bring the nutrient supply to the fallout shelter the next day and ask Han Junhua's opinion. Then he would visit the 6th Street to examine Chunan's current work progress. He pushed open the door to the living room to see Yao Yao and Lin Lin sitting at the table. The two small heads were both deep in thought as they engaged in a discussion about a blueprint. "What are you looking at it?" Zhang Chen came closer out of curiosity. "Ah, Big Brother is back. Are you done for the day?" Yao Yao smiled gently at Zhang Chen as she turned her head. Lin Lin proudly straightened her back and kept her chin high. "We're currently researching a magnificent technology, but since it requires some computer knowledge, I have to ask Yao Jiayu." Zhang Chen expected Lin Lin to boast, so he chose to ignore her and directed his gaze at the cute Yao Yao. "Hello, stop ignoring me." Lin Lin protested. "It's about a database converting brain waves to electronic signals. It's nothing special," Yao Yao timidly said. "Database?" Zhang Chen was puzzled. "Sorry for troubling you guys so much." Sun Ziru walked out of the hallway dressed in a light purple floral dress. She lowered her eyes apologetically. "Not at all. It's not troublesome." Lin Lin felt awkward by Sun Ziru's sincerity as she scratched her face. Although it was Ting Ting in her body who destroyed the chip causing Sun Ziru to become like this, she still bore some responsibility for not controlling the bug. Even if Sun Ziru never blamed her, she always felt guilty. While Lin Lin had a big mouth and was somewhat arrogant, she was still a kind person deep inside. "No problem at all. Yao Yao also hopes that sister can start walking soon." Yao Yao nodded her head earnestly. "Thank you, everyone," Sun Ziru said emotionally. Zhang Chen sensed they had a good relationship with each other. Was it because they lived together for so long? "Thank you too, me?" Zhang Chen looked in surprise at Sun Ziru smiling at him. It was only because of you that I reunited with my sister and meet so many lovely friends and also a cute brother-in-law." Her eyes turned into two crescents. The smile was sweet, but Zhang Chen felt the smile gave a vibe similar to her sister. The devil-like smile. Zhang Chen gulped as he shivered uncontrollably. "Fu Ke, does that count as teasing me?" After dinner, Zhang Chen and Sun Zhao went to the third-floor gym. Inside were two virtual reality training chambers. Zhang Chen was told that the virtual reality MRP was finished. Of course, he couldn't wait to experience it as he dragged Sun Zhao along. Was a name created by Du Yongkang. He didn't create the content himself because a lot of the data and models were already available. All he needed to do was replicate the famous virtual reality MRP on the new engine. Although it sounded easy, it was a large amount of work. To complete the project, Du Yongkang requested 10-something people who previously worked in game design to assist him. On the other hand, Zhang Chen also increased the difficulty of his work. To better fit the culture of the modern world and people's spiritual needs, Zhang Chen downloaded a library of Xuanhuan web novels and made Du Yongkang read through them. He asked him to try his best to recreate the passion when he designed the game. This troubled Du Yongkang greatly. While Zhang Chen enjoyed the novels, Yongkang didn't understand the fun of them at all since he was forced to read millions of words just to complete his assigned task. Regardless, after half a year of work, the beta version of the game was finally finished. Whether it was fun or not, Zhang Chen was determined to figure that out himself. Chapter 366. The game rating becoming weird. Although it was an MRP, aside from the NPC that possessed basic artificial intelligence, there were only 2 players. The 2 virtual reality chambers connected directly to the server, which acted as a private server. The game content was easy to understand and follow. It involved 2 landmasses, 4 empires, the cultural infusion between the East and West, and a distinct otherworldly land that introduced the background of the world. The opening animation was exquisitely designed, but Zhang Chen didn't want to waste time and decided to skip it and went straight into the character creation interface. There was a variety of classes and races that could be selected, including most of the usual ones covered in MRP-type novels. Because it was a Game Master account, Zhang Chen could directly select the hidden race and class that would normally only open after thousands of special conditions were met. Zhang Chen didn't want to spend too much time selecting his character, so he chose the most balanced human as well as the warrior profession with a balance of attack and defense abilities. A few words flew in front of his eyes. Chapter 1. Medieval Era. The game would be permanently influenced by the actions of users in the game, pushing ahead of the current progression of the gaming world. For example, if a player conquered thousands of hurdles to complete a hidden quest to reveal the magic steam engine, the NPC would form the Progressive Party, and the Conservative Party would take the players who chose sides in an epic battle to determine whether the world would progress to Chapter 2, Steam Era, or remain in Chapter 1, Medieval Era. When an overly curious player triggered a demigod or destructor to be summoned into the world and caused the Endless Hell spell to be cast on the entire server, if they chose to sacrifice their soul to Lucifer, then the game would return to Chapter 1, Medieval Era. The progression of the world meant that new classes and even new races would be born. Whether the Steam Era or the Magical Era appeared was based on the actions of the players in the world. The amount of freedom was almost identical to the real world as endless possibilities existed. This level of detail was an impossible task for modern supercomputers because the number of variables and changes would be an astronomical number. But with the technology of the apocalypse, this level of detail was no problem at all. No one would choose to miss the opportunity of experiencing a second life. Zhang Chen could already imagine the craze people would have when they purchased the virtual reality helmet. White light illuminated the space and Zhang Chen appeared in the starting village, naked. Another white light flashed and Sun Jiao also showed up naked beside Zhang Chen. How come I don't have any clothes? Sun Jiao cried as she looked down to cover her private areas while she trembled with a red face. Do you like elves? Zhang Chen scratched his chin as he examined the character Sun Jiao created. Other than her voice, it was completely different compared to the real her. The chin was too sharp to be considered humanly possible, and slim and elegant ears passed through the green strands of hair. It had a slender waist as well as a chest the size of soccer balls. It had the face of an angel but the figure of a devil. As Zhang Chen looked, he nodded, pleased. The face creation system must be nerfed since she doesn't look too different from her actual appearance. The idea of an ugly girl with a pretty face speaking sweetly to him gave him goosebumps. Also, the gender has to be restricted. He discovered that during character creation, he could choose to create a female account. Is Du Yangkong dumb? When he thought about a man with a female account interacting with him, a shiver went down his spine. At least create a separate server just for people like that. Is this the time to say that? Clothes. Give me clothes. Sun Jiao cried out in embarrassment. It was rare to see Sun Jiao in such a panic. Of course, appearing naked on the street would make anyone panic. It's okay, we're all NPC. Zhang Chen extended his finger and pressed into the air. Also, with the existence of the control center, you can create clothes yourself. A long dress dropped on the ground. Sun Jiao, with the speed of lightning, snatched the clothes on the ground and covered her private areas. Then the benevolent elf smiled gruesomely at the shocked crowd and unleashed thunderous strikes. Her finger moved. Thousands of flame trails dropped from the ground. The level 100 mage's forbidden spell Endless Hell burned the entire starting village to dust. Typically speaking, it wasn't possible to kill people in the starting village, but Sun Jiao ruthlessly abused the infinite abilities of the NPC. That was how GM played the game. You don't have to wipe everyone out. There were a few dwarf lawless there. The flames dropping on Zhang Chen displayed a bunch of zeros. The spell was useless on him. They're programs after all. Sun Jiao gave Zhang Chen a dirty look as she bared her teeth to display her prowess. She was indeed right since all these people were NPC. While they appeared shocked, embarrassed and even had sexual desires when they saw a naked body. Behind the characters were just lines of code. All the personality programs were based on D&D's matrix and were determined based on random variables. Okay, you're right. Zhang Chen scanned the scorched earth and collapsed buildings. The smell of burnt meat even drifted into his nose. It wasn't good to be too realistic. If blood began to pour out with a single sword cut and a mere flame ball spell burned people, the game wouldn't operate for too long before the Radio and Television Ministry shut this down. Create a less violent version? Maybe they could automatically identify the age and nationality of the user and limit the graphic effects based on local laws of the user. What's fun about this game? Sun Jiao scrolled with her finger as she worked on her equipment. Zhang Chen didn't need to ask as he knew she must have put the 10 stars god weapon into her inventory. A green light was cast out as godly equipment. The armor of the Elf Queen was donned by Sun Jiao. This equipment perfectly demonstrated the idea of saving clothes for the country. Only a few metal plates covered the private area and most of her skin was exposed under a thin veil. Seeing that there was no one around, Sun Jiao didn't consider whether the equipment that resembled lingerie was embarrassing or not, but she teased Zhang Chen with her 36GS. Looking at the naughty Sun Jiao, Zhang Chen scanned the tightly wrapped clothes in front of her chest. Did you drag the chest size up to the max? Sun Jiao, who had her secret exposed, didn't even blush as she rolled her eyes. I don't believe you didn't drag your thing to the max. To be honest, Zhang Chen hadn't even thought about it. He allowed the system to replicate his look when he created his character. Sun Jiao reminded him that in the virtual world, he could be a bit bigger. His finger drew in the air as the indescribable part began to bulk at an unbelievable speed. Zhang Chen had a smirk on his face. Why don't you test it out? Chapter 367. Recently at the camp, the area inside the camp walls more than doubled and extended from outside the square to the bus stop. The four corners of the camp had patrol towers 10 meters high. Each of the towers was equipped with 4 20mm cannons. The large-caliber stationary machine gun could not only easily rip Deathclaw's armor, but it could even do damage to Roshan's high-density fat. Of course, the machine gun was primarily targeted towards the Roshan, since the Deathclaw was limited in number and hard to hit, while the Roshan could bite with eyes closed. Compared to when Zhang Chen left, the changes inside the base were also astonishing. The tent area was messy as the ghetto was removed and replaced by rows of concrete apartment buildings. Because of the improvements in living conditions, the mood of the fallout shelter residents was more pleasant. At least few people had despair on their faces while walking on the streets. Based on the directions Zhang Chen gave before he left, Zulu built another lab on the surface. However, due to lack of experimental equipment, the lab on the surface couldn't be put into service and most of the experiments were still conducted underground. Zhang Chen didn't have to wait too long before Wang Zhou and Zulu came to greet him. After some catching up, Zhang Chen began to ask about the status of the camp. The number of station troops increased from 80 to 200. To adjust for the lack of personnel, a new drone control terminal was established in the camp with an attack fleet of 400 drones being deployed. Wang Zhou reported the defense status of the base. Have there been any security concerns? Zhang Chen raised his eyebrows. The activity of the zombies from Wanghai is increasing. Also, mutants are becoming more active. Last month, there was an incident where a Deathclaw attack caused 14 casualties. Wang Zhou lowered his head in guilt. An incident like this occurring was completely his fault. The Songjiang area didn't have any Deathclaw nests, so no Deathclaw should have been active in the area. This was almost common sense to the Wanghai survivors. It was enough of a coincidence that Zhang Chen encountered a mother of Deathclaw last time, but no one expected that another Deathclaw would be active in the area. Raise your head. Deathclaw attacks weren't your fault. Your responsibility is to react and handle this type of emergency situation. But from what I see, you are doing very well. Zhang Chen scanned the walls surrounding the base. Wang Zhou raised his head and looked sincerely at Zhang Chen. Also, Do you have any more intel from the last explosion at the camp? Jiang Chen had a sense that the death of the elder man and the golden apple might be connected somehow, not for the time being, but we found a digitalized human body on the adjacent block. While there was no direct evidence linking him and the explosion, based on the time of destruction, the body was destroyed on the day of the explosion, Wang Zhou said. Digitalized human, a frown appeared on Jiang Chen's face. Do you have pictures? Wang Zhou nodded, brought out an image from his EP and passed it to Jiang Chen. Jiang Chen's pupils gazed at the distinct figure, Lin Keowen. Although the face was barely recognizable, from the remaining few facial traits, Jiang Chen could still recognize his identity. We also found a laser sword and a dagger nearby. I see. Jiang Chen nodded. Regarding the mysterious digitalized human with ill intentions, he currently had no solutions. Even with his body destroyed, he could very possibly revive at some unknown location. The bearded mercenary EP provided some clues, but because of their high firepower, the helicopter couldn't get any closer. While Cheng Weiguo did try to investigate the issue through drones, they were still intercepted. Let's put both issues aside, for now. Focus on the defense of the camp and ensure the safety of the fallout shelter residents. They are highly valued experts in different fields. That is all. Yes, sir. Wang Zhou saluted and left. Then Jiang Chen looked at Zulu. What about the internal affair? She smiled with confidence and said, the research project team has increased from 10 to 17 members. The research results include 4 sub-projects related to T4 power armor, 20mm transportable cannon, Tiger II, and improved nutrient supply. Tiger II is completed? Jiang Chen was shocked. Since it was limited by the lack of raw materials, the test model could not be produced. But the researchers built a mathematical model to verify the compatibility of this Tiger model. Perfect. Where's the lead for this project? Jiang Chen was jubilant. Inside the fallout shelter. Do you want me to call him up? Zulu said, no need, I have to go down anyways. Jiang Chen waved his hand. Anything else I can help you with? Zulu said, take me to the basement. Roger, Zulu said respectfully. It was already approaching June, but the basement was still cold and damp. The guard opened the metal gate for Jiang Chen and he waited outside with Zulu. Jiang Chen wavered in front of the door, but he still walked in. Han Junhua raised her head and looked peacefully at Jiang Chen. Are you going to surrender? No response. With eyes as composed as still water, she made Jiang Chen frustrated. How could one person be stubborn to this extent? An evil thought flashed through his head, but he took a deep breath and restrained his desires. The longer he stayed in the apocalypse, the more blurry his boundaries became. Since he had just come back, however, rationality won this battle. I hope you seriously reconsider. Jiang Chen gave her a long, meaningful look and left the basement. With the closing of the metal door, Han Junhua felt relieved. Although she didn't know why he didn't do anything this time, to her, it was a relief. Chapter 368, Tiger 2. Jiang Chen took the elevator down to the fallout shelter. Just as he was about to send the nutrient supply sample to Wang Fengpin and look at the results of the Tiger 2 project team, he happened to encounter the 2 people he was looking for in front of the lab. They seemed to be arguing over something. Bring in X1 bacteria inside the fallout shelter. Are you crazy? Tiger 2's project lead Feng Wei shouted at Wang Fengpin. X1 bacteria controlled the zombies. This is for experimentation, for science, and it's not like you haven't been injected with vaccines. Why are you so scared? With spit droplets all over his face, Wang Fengpin roared. The 2 were arguing furiously with each other. If it wasn't for someone bumping into them and the guard standing by, the 2 educated people might erupt into a brawl. And then, create an X3 or X4 immune to the vaccine? Feng Wei said mockingly. Any experiments are designed safely. I only need a small strand of DNA. This is the distrust and bias of life science. X1 bacteria was detected on the touchscreen of the quantum computer in the lab. Do you think it's safe? Feng Wei was enraged. Due to the limited experimentation equipment inside the fallout shelter, there was only one quantum computer capable of handling experiment simulation. The computer was pivotal to research in the 22nd century, as a lot of complicated calculation and data modeling could only be completed by it. Although Fishbone Base offered a reward of 50,000 crystals at 6th Street for anyone who could find an experiment-level quantum computer, unfortunately to this day, no news was heard. Therefore, all 17 research projects had to use the single quantum computer in the fallout shelter. Oh my god, which dumb SS didn't wash their hands before they touched the screen? I will investigate this, but, boss. Just as he was about to erupt into another debate with his colleague, Wang Fengpin noticed Zhang Chen standing beside them and immediately shut his mouth. The people in the hallway dispersed when they saw Zhang Chen. What's going on? Wang Fengpin cut in front of Feng Wei to explain. This is what happened. Because the seaweed project has stagnated due to a bottleneck, I asked the guards to collect some cells from the zombie's neck to obtain X1 bacteria. X1 bacteria? What does that have to do with the power-generating seaweed? Zhang Chen was puzzled. Because X1 bacteria have high photosynthesis efficiency. To increase the conversion of sunlight in the seaweed, one of my researchers proposed a possibility that from the X1 bacteria's nucleus, the DNA of the chloroplast could be implanted into the seaweed. What if the seaweed ends up displaying similar characteristics of X1 bacteria? Feng Wei interrupted with a sneer. Fouquet, that's a big problem. Feng Wei's words made Zhang Chen jump. He first thought that what Wang Fengpin did was right. Research must be done at all costs. But when he remembered that this must be grown in the modern world, he instantly became worried. He didn't want Resident Evil occurring in the modern world. That's impossible. You don't understand genetic engineering. Wang Fengpin's face was red and steamy. But I understand the risk to technology. Feng Wei immediately countered Wang Fengpin's perspective. Enough, stop arguing. Zhang Chen stopped their argument out of annoyance. The two of them both shut their mouths. But from the way they stared at each other, they were clearly still heated. After a pause, Zhang Chen looked at Wang Fengpin. Transplanting DNA strands from X1 bacteria must be stopped now. Just like what Feng Wei said. Research must be carefully designed and executed within safe boundaries. Any DNA samples injected with X1 bacteria must be destroyed. Yes, Wang Fengpin said reluctantly. Seeing as he got the upper hand, the tips of Feng Wei's mouth curved up proudly. Zhang Chen patted Wang Fengpin's shoulder and used an encouraging tone to comfort him. It's great to take bold, innovative leaps, but the amount of risk can't be ignored. Also, here is a sample of the mass-produced improved nutrient supply. Take a look to see if it meets quality standards. Since his research was discarded, it would be natural for him to feel defeated, but Wang Fengpin wasn't narrow-minded. After taking a deep breath, he bounced back from his negative emotions. Okay. He took the nutrient supply from Zhang Chen and left. Then Zhang Chen turned to Feng Wei. Report this type of incident to the camp, and in the future, don't try to solve incidents like this privately. You're not a barbarian. What can arguments solve? Yes, Feng Wei replied, abashed. Internal conflicts could only be solved by remaining neutral. Zhang Chen didn't know any other methods to resolve strained relationships between researchers. Let's not talk about this anymore. I heard the Tiger 2's design is completed. So I'm here to take a look. Could you show me the model? Of course. Please follow me. When he heard Zhang Chen ask about the research project, Feng Wei immediately became energetic and hastily walked to the computer room. Zhang Chen followed him and saw the quantum computer. The quantum computer was similar to the gaming computer he picked up at Fallout Shelter Row 05. But its computation power was clearly a level above the mixed algorithms supercomputer. The machine was the size of a van and connected by all kinds of wires and cords. Just from its appearance, the quantum computer looked plain from the outside, but considering how carefully Feng Wei worked on it, it was easy to see how valuable this thing was. Quickly, a blue light surfaced from the hologram device and formed a miniature model of Tiger 2. Different from the previous Tiger, The Tiger II was designed with a firing cannon. It had a length of 10.7 meters, a width of 4.1 meters, and the vehicle was rectangular in shape. The turret was located at the back of the vehicle with the barrel parallel to the front armor. It had a weight of 63 tons with the armor composed of A-type steel. The Tiger II battlefield positioning is a tank destroyer while also supporting the artillery. Its defense is mainly concentrated in the front and turret armor. In addition to the main cannon, on the top of the turret is a 10mm machine gun to attack targets in close proximity. Of course, words can't reflect its actual combat ability. Let me show you. After a brief explanation about the specifications of Tiger II, Feng Wei pressed another button on the control screen. The hologram graphics began to change as a desert appeared underneath the Tiger II. 7 sets of weight-bearing wheels under the steel armor began to rotate as the Tiger moved at full speed in the desert. The environment then changed from desert to city, city to forest. This is the model we created based on simulating real physical environments. It realistically replicates the combat ability of the tank. I'll demonstrate the actual combat effectiveness of Tiger II. With a stunned expression on Zhang Chen's face, Feng Wei proudly pressed a button on the screen. Giant letters surfaced on the hologram. Battle simulation. The environment changed again as the Tiger II model reappeared in an empty desert. At the same time, 4 soldiers with Python anti-tank rocket launchers appeared in 4 different directions. 4 rockets launched simultaneously before they landed on the front, side, back, and turret of Tiger II. Flames engulfed the Tiger II, but when the smoke dispersed, only the back armor of the Tiger II received any kind of damage. Zhang Chen had witnessed the destructive power of the Python before. The chief tank destroyed in the Civil War had a massive hole blown in its front armor. Though he never personally experienced the war, he saw the image captured by drones from the rocket striking the target. Whether fighting against anti-tank weapons or weapons of other tanks, Tiger II is designed with survivability in mind. Of course, it's not meant to be a tank, so I don't recommend sending it to the front line to fight against the other tanks. Then Feng Wei demonstrated Tiger II's survivability against other pre-war tanks, and the results were impressive. Other than being unable to defend against the Wanderer's particle cannon, most of the tank's blows could be absorbed by the front armor of the Tiger II. As for the power of the Type 50 electromagnetic cannon, Zhang Chen saw it many times already, so Feng Wei didn't need to demonstrate it. Compared to the previous Tiger with its cannon on the truck, only the Tiger II's armor was improved. The cannon itself didn't change. What do you think? Are you pleased with the Tiger II? Feng Wei already knew the answer from Zhang Chen's expression, but he still asked proudly. Compared to Wang Fengpin's personality, Feng Wei was more extroverted. He had the pride of a scientist when he handled people and things. Although he restrained some of his personality in front of Zhang Chen, the dictator, his personality still subconsciously seeped through. But Zhang Chen didn't mind. As long as people viewed these traits as a weakness, he could accept it. Haha, I'm very pleased. What's the cost? Zhang Chen smiled in satisfaction. Everything is on this list. Feng Wei handed Zhang Chen a graphene card. Less than 101 tons of iron, 10 tons of aluminum, 2.1 tons of molybdenum. Greater than. The first few were okay, but the long list of rare metals gave Zhang Chen a headache. The lack of supply of the rare metals must be solved. It was still too difficult to fill industrials' need by simply recycling. Chapter 369. The Rare Quantum Computer. When Zhang Chen returned to the surface, he immediately found Zulu and explained to her his idea of deepwater mining. Deepwater mining? Zulu looked at Zhang Chen, puzzled. All detectable mines on Earth have been mined clean. Even if the mantle beneath the deep sea a few kilometers below still has undeveloped deposits, because of the high cost of mining and the severe damage to the geological environment, the operation would be impossible to conduct. Also, the existence of space elevators significantly reduced the cost of space. 22nd century's mining operations were all focused on space mining. It was fair to say that deepwater mining was as outdated as coal power generation. That's right, deepwater mining technology, preferably an automated system. Is that possible? Zhang Chen asked. It is certainly possible since it is an outdated technology. But are there mining deposits along the coast of Wanghai? You don't have to worry about that. As to where to mine, I have my plans. Zhang Chen laughed. Since Zhang Chen has already spoken, Zulu nodded and agreed. Okay, I will establish another research team to focus on the replication of the deepwater mining technology. However, currently there is only one quantum computer. If there is an increase in the project's progression, it will slow down the research speed of other projects. Zhang Chen was lost for a moment as he didn't know what research was currently being conducted and the reliance of the research on quantum computers in the 22nd century. A lot of people born after the war didn't understand either, but since Zulu came from before the war, she knew some elements of it. Acutely, she read the confusion on Zhang Chen's face as she concisely explained the reasoning. Quantum computers' power calculation ability is precise enough to simulate the physical environment at quark level, which would allow a lot of experiments to be simulated in a pure math state. It was not only easy to eliminate the possible interference in the experiment, but it could also simulate a chemical reaction that usually takes a few days to complete in less than a second. Of course, that's only one of its functions. When Zulu explained this, Zhang Chen finally understood why all the countries in the modern world dumped endless amount of money in the bottomless pit known as the quantum computer. Once completed, without any exaggeration, the country's research speed would exponentially increase. While a lot of organizations and countries all bragged about completing the initial stage of the quantum computer, with IBM and Google as the frontrunners, they were still far from the actual quantum computer. Also, although they are using quantum algorithm, the computer's computation speed can't even surpass traditional computers. Before material science had its monumental breakthrough, any bragging of the development of the quantum computer was merely gloating. Just like without the invention of reinforced concrete, it was impossible for skyscrapers to be built. What's the ideal ratio of one quantum computer to project teams? Zhang Chen gave it some thought and said in an undertone. From experience, the ideal ratio would be 10 project teams to one quantum computer. But right now it is not feasible. There was only one in the fallout shelter with 17 projects all using it. With an additional project in deepwater mining, crowding would be an understatement. Is there production technology for the quantum computer? Zhang Chen asked. Yes, but we don't have the production capability, Zulu said with resignation. It made sense. Zhang Chen also revealed a smile with deep resignation. Okay, since another research team cannot be added, the people on this surface shouldn't do nothing. Although it is hard to complete research without the quantum computer, they can still easily handle wasteland technology retrieving and information gathering. Okay. Zulu nodded. Rural area. North of Wanghai, a man walked along the cracked concrete road. A gray hood covered his face. However, from his torn clothes, he seemed to have experienced an intense battle not long ago. Because of the war, infrastructure such as bridges was mostly destroyed by the blasts. The Binjiang Bridge that stretched across Long River was broken into several segments, but it didn't bother him. While throwing a claw out of his right hand, he leaped over unimaginably and agilely swung across. Both feet stomped onto the ground. He gathered his balance and let out a breath. After he crossed the river, it would no longer be a part of Wanghai territory. The screeching howl of Deathclaw came from the distance not far behind his back, but it quickly faded. He attached the claw back on his belt and took off his hood. Phew, of course, it won't chase. The face. It was Lin Keowen. A hologram map appeared 2 inches in front of his eyes. The mechanical eyes slightly turned as he directed his vision to the west. Wanghai rural area's zombie concentration was extremely scattered, but the density of mutants was relatively high. However, the mutants seemed to be different from the ones inside Wanghai. They didn't seem to demonstrate aggressiveness, at least not to the digitalized human. A Deathclaw was wandering among the shambles, hunting for food. When it passed by Lin Keowen, it only sniffed its nose before he gave up on the prey made out of metal and silica gel. A few survivors, hiding in the dark, fearfully looked at the Deathclaw pass by Lin Keoan. They were baffled at the fact that the Deathclaw didn't attack this man. His electronic eyes scanned the survivors, but he chose to ignore them and headed to his destination. Aside from the two groups of bandits who wasted a few minutes of his time, he had a smooth journey. He headed west for 2 hours before he stopped in front of a warehouse. A man with a cigarette in his mouth walked out of the shadows. Along with him were a few soldiers holding rifles. From the symbol on their uniform, they were from the Crimson Chamber of Commerce. "You are late." The man with the cigarette blew out a ring of smoke. "Got caught up along the way," Lin Keoan apologized. The man glanced at the blood yet to dry on his face. He didn't ask for the reason as he took out his cigarette from his mouth. "Then let's start." Lin Keoan didn't answer him. He walked around him to the door of the warehouse. He put his finger on the circle on the warehouse panel. "Fingerprint identification?" the cigarette man asked. "Electric signal identification." Lin Keoan corrected him concisely and backed away a few steps. The door opened, exposing the items stored in the warehouse. The man's pupils contracted. A full warehouse stuffed with B-grade steel. By crude estimation, there were at least 1,000 tons. "It's hard to imagine how rich you are." Greed flashed across the man's eyes. At the 6th Street, the price of 1 ton of B-grade steel was already 100 crystals. 1,000 tons would sell for 100,000 crystals. But he thought about what his boss told him as the greed in his mind began to cool down. "It's the wealth of my father, purchased before the war." He looked at the cigarette man as Lin Keoan didn't seem to mind the expression change on his face. Then he said emotionally, "Like our agreement, half of the steel's usage will be determined by you. The other half, I need you to follow my demand and produce the parts I need." After a pause, a noble smile appeared on Lin Keoan's face. "Of course, if I don't see what I want to see a month later, some unfortunate events may occur." That smile was cruel. Chapter 370, The Second Crusade. Jiang Chen currently had no better ideas in regards to the quantum computer. He could only do his best to collect more information. Before he left, he said a few words to Zulu. He especially emphasized the research of military technology, the technology of the recovery of man-made islands, space elevator, and synchronous space station. Jiang Chen headed to the 6th Street by helicopter. After about 10 minutes of flying, the helicopter arrived above the 6th Street. With an aerial view, the 6th Street was indeed different compared to before. After Chu Nan became the acting general, he immediately tightened the control of the army and established strict rules. He also extended the free trade policy used by the Group of 10. Even with a military dictatorship, the government didn't use any authority unlawfully. Compared to before, the military government led by him was fairer and more just. The benefits of his action was evident. Not only did the survivors from Wanghai City begin to migrate toward the 6th Street, but even survivors in nearby cities also followed suit. While they increased the labor force, they also brought the technology necessary for the 6th Street. The skyscrapers in the inner circle and the buildings in the outer circle began to look more prosperous. Jiang Chen noticed while being in the air that the underground sewerage entrance was now a part of the newly built wall of the outer circle. Other than that, small camps were surrounding the 6th Street and scattered across the ruins. The camps were mostly built by businessmen stationed at the 6th Street. Due to the price of land gradually increasing in the outer circle, they built their factories and camps outside of the wall. They paid taxes to the military government, followed the 6th Street's laws, and accepted protection from the patrolling team. The small city was like a seed, spreading onto the barren land and bringing forth the birth of a new sprout known as civilization. The guide on the ground waved his signal sticks, notifying the helicopter it was safe to land. After coming to a complete stop, Jiang Chen jumped out of the helicopter and saw Chu Nan already waiting at the door. When the helicopter first appeared on the radar, Chu Nan immediately rushed over. "I haven't seen you in a while. How long has it been?" Jiang Chen exclaimed to his old friend. "Half a year already. Do you want to check my place out?" Chu Nan laughed. Compared to everyone else, he went through the most significant change. Jiang Chen recalled that when he first freed him from the basement, He still had naiveness on his face, but now, he was calm and reserved. "Of course, it is convenient." Zhang Chen gladly accepted his invitation. An ordinary-looking car stopped in front of them. The driver saluted and opened the door for them. It was a 10-minute drive before the car arrived at the council building. At the top of the council building was the offices of the military government, and 2 of the rooms were Chunan's home. Chunan warmly invited Zhang Chen inside, and they sat on the sofa. Zhu Zioxia in casual clothes walked out to pour water for them. Just by looking at her, the former lone traveler's mental state seemed to have recovered drastically. Although he didn't know if she has regained her memory, at least she didn't live in the misery of the Huaizong mercenaries anymore. The two chatted and began to discuss the development of the 6th Street. Because of the influence of economic growth, the total population of the 6th Street grew from 53,021 last quarter to 82,102 this quarter. The number of factories increased from 37 to 239. The number of registered merchants went up from 301 to 2,000, and there are 29 new mercenaries, 105 hunting teams, and 421 scavenger groups. These are explosive numbers. Zhang Chen couldn't do anything but praise him. Chunan nodded. Economic growth primarily benefited from the crusade last fall. The population growth was attributable to economic growth and political stabilization. And your wise decisions, Zhang Chen mocked. Haha, it is your wise promotion, Chunan said humbly. Haha, don't give me that. Your achievement is your achievement. Chunan didn't reply, but the smile on his face indeed showed proudness. Chunan cleared his throat as he continued, after the good news, there is the bad news. Oh, what's the bad news? The survivors that escaped from Jia City to the 6th Street brought information from the west. This spring, the mutated humans attacked the defenders from the 7th area. With the funding of the Dusk Church, they captured Jia City. Because of this, the number of trade routes decreased by 60% from Heng City, and the routes entering Wanghai from the southwest were practically blocked. After he listened to Chunan's report, he raised his eyebrows. Jia City lied in between Wanghai and Heng City. If the mutated humans captured this area, the merchants between Wanghai and Heng must be affected. Compared to the bandits without an organization, the organized mutated humans were obviously more concerning. And your opinion is? Organize the Second Crusade with the goal of freeing Jia, Chunan said succinctly. A rather aggressive proposal. The Second Crusade? What's there to take away from the mutated humans? Zhang Chen was somewhat surprised by the proposal. Do you still remember their equipment? Chunan with a smile looked at Zhang Chen. Equipment? Other than heavy machine guns, and the armor on their body. D-grade steel. Zhang Chen suddenly realized there are ample amount of steel reserves in the mutated human's head. There was enough to turn them into armors and treat them as moving fortresses. The last crusade for the source of bacteria brought crystals here and ignited the fire of industrialization, and this crusade will bring the steel that will be necessary to fuel the flame of industrialization. Needless to say, it was an attractive proposal. Although Zhang Chen could solve the problem of iron ores, C-grade steel required more than just iron. There was a higher requirement for rare metals. The mutated humans' C-grade steel was there and available. It was undoubtedly a good choice. When are you planning to act? Zhang Chen asked in an undertone. Departing in the fall, finishing by winter. He answered quickly. This guy clearly has been planning this, as he even had a strategy in place. Departing in the fall and finishing by winter, it would leave an ample amount of time to prepare while finishing the battle before the mutated humans gain the advantage during winter. It was also the perfect timing to eliminate the obstacles before the next spring for the trade routes. Even excluding economic reasons, the mutated humans were a big concern. Even if the 6th Street didn't send out a force in the fall, there was no guarantee that they would not invade during the winter. But it was approaching June. Was there enough time to prepare the crusade? Zhang Chen began to deliberate this in his mind. Chapter 371, Shell Grains. If we do fight, what's our probability of winning? Zhang Chen thought Chunan would give him an accurate response, but he shook his head. Hard to say. Why? Zhang Chen asked. From the current command structure, even if we mobilize more troops, it would still be hard to win. Chunan was straightforward. Changing the command structure. Do you have any recommendations? Before he headed back last time, Zhang Chen had been thinking about this problem, but he didn't really have an idea. He has established the administrative structure, but the militarily one, to be honest, other than knowing how to play a few strategy games, he was completely illiterate in military knowledge. I don't know too much about military command. Didn't you capture a colonel? She probably knows more than all of us, Chunan said. A glimpse of awkwardness flashed across Zhang Chen's face as his eyes drifted to the side. Ahem, she still hasn't given up her loyalty to the organization. With a slight frown, Chunan pondered, that shouldn't be possible. Is there something wrong with the chip? Do you need me to help you? No need. I can take care of it. Zhang Chen quickly rejected the proposal. Chunan took a moment to process before he looked at Zhang Chen dubiously. Allow me to be honest. It is not wise to have compassion for the captive. Her knowledge is extremely critical to your cause. I hope General can consider seriously. I will. Zhang Chen gave a vague answer. I will do my best to reform the command structure. Do you have a preparatory plan for the crusade? Seeing that Zhang Chen didn't want to continue on the topic, Chunan knew it was best to talk about something else. Of course, first, is military resources. We can use the bank to distribute war bonds in order to fund the war. The payment will be the supplies obtained from the mutated humans. Then we will use the gathered funding to purchase from the major military factories for weapon and ammo. This will inject some life into the stagnant military industry. At the same time, the funding will be used to hire mercenaries and hunting teams, as well as pay for the salary of the soldiers reporting to duty. Not a bad plan. Zhang Chen praised. A war that wouldn't cost a single cent, but would instead make money. Using the citizens' money to pay for the military bill of the Fishbone base, and using the orders to promote economic growth. It was a brilliant move. What about the soldiers? How many soldiers can we mobilize? Zhang Chen continued to ask. Approximately 1,000 soldiers. A sufficient number. Zhang Chen nodded, pleased. Including the 1,000 slaves Zhang Chen purchased, he will have 2,000 soldiers. Once training is completed, the Fishbone base's military personnel will more than double. Then the preparation for the crusade will be up to you. If there is nothing else, I will head out now. Zhang Chen stood up. Seeing that Zhang Chen was about to leave, Chunan also stood up and walked him to the door. Although he still needed to take care of some things, Zhang Chen was not in a rush. It has been more than a year. He wanted to see how developed the small city has become. After exchanging departing words with Chunan, Zhang Chen strolled through the inner circle before he headed to the outer circle. Compared to last year, this place did indeed become more prosperous. The buildings along the side of the streets were all renovated. A lot of them were bulldozed down and rebuilt into 3- or 4-story high buildings. Just by standing here, ignoring the yellowish-green radiation dust, it didn't feel like the wasteland at all. Busy crowds, a variety of items. The lone travelers with rifles on their backs negotiated prices with the store owners while soldiers in carbon nano-combat suit maintained the order of the market. Other than the everyday clothes worn by the Wang Hai survivors, there occasionally would be someone with drastically different-looking clothes. Some were from Luzhu 400 kilometers away, some were from the Wu city. Some were even from the North Alliance area. While they brought crystals and goods, they also brought missing technology. For example, a useful smart mechanical dog that could carry up to 100 kilograms of supplies in all terrains eased the scavengers from carrying all the garbage. Another example was the silk from a species of mutated spiders. The silk could be produced into the chemical adhesive and used as a replacement to the commonly used adhesive. A lot of private factories already absorbed such technologies and started to manufacture these new goods. The former ghetto was already bulldozed down with apartment buildings being built. Most were private properties with a small portion owned by the military government as shelters. There were no more malnourished prostitutes. What replaced them were legally operated entertainment centers and sex workers dressed appropriately. There were no more refugees on the street waiting for their death. As long as the person was able-bodied, they could find a job in the 6th Street. The difference here compared to 1 year ago was the idea of civilization. Don't miss the opportunity. Fresh shell grains. Take a look. A merchant's shouting drew Zhang Chen's attention. A not-so-spacious store was crowded with people. 2 mercenary-looking workers were packaging the grains on the scale. The merchant in animal fur shouted while accepting payment from the customer and handing them the bags of shell grain. Shell grain? Zhang Chen looked at the bags of grains in surprise. He got closer and asked the merchant, "How much is this?" 1 kilogram for 3 crystals, no haggling. The merchant didn't recognize Zhang Chen's face, so he must be an outsider. It is similar to the price of a bag of instant noodles, slightly cheaper than rice. Zhang Chen thought, where are these things being transported from? Zhang Chen asked. The merchant looked at Zhang Chen cautiously and didn't respond right away. He only said, "Are you going to buy it or not? If you are not, then move." Zhang Chen didn't mind his rudeness as he took out 3 grain-sized crystals and threw it in the merchant's hand. "Give me 1 kilogram." When the merchant saw the crystals, a smile quickly appeared on his face as he handed him a bag of shell grains with both of his hands. With the bag of shell grains in his hand, Zhang Chen stood there for a while before he walked to the warehouse area. When he arrived, Zhao Chenwu had been waiting at the door for a while. Beside him was another person, Hu Yaoed from the giant pit. Hu Yaoed's eyes lit up when he saw Zhang Chen and quickly went up to greet him. "Mr. Zhang, we meet again. I brought the slaves you wanted. Where are they?" Zhang Chen looked around. There was no one else in sight. Ahem, of course. It is not here. Slave business is usually done at the shelter outside of the wall. It is a rule set by you. Zhao Chenwu walked up and explained to Zhang Chen. Could be a rule established by Chunan. Zhang Chen didn't know. Chapter 372, Mining Resources Deposition Map. The 3 came to the slave trade area at the outer circle. After Zhang Chen paid the 20,000 crystals, the 1,000 slaves were transferred under his name. Escorted by fishbone soldiers, the slaves in shredded clothes walked in the direction of the underground tunnel. They will be brought to the fishbone base and receive 3 months of military training. If they successfully pass, they will be promoted to lower citizen. For the people that can't pass, they will be transported to the colonies for production work. Hu Yaoed gave an elaborative bow after he received the crystals from Zhang Chen and then left with his back hunched. "I bought something from a store at the 6th Street. Do you know where these came from?" After he dragged Zhao Chenwu to the side, Zhang Chen took out the bag of shell grains. "Shell grains? I know about this. It was not until my trade fleet left the province of Suhang did I realize the wasteland was far bigger than we have imagined. In Jinshu land 600 kilometers away, the survivors there all grow these types of crops. Only recently did these crops arrive here." Zhao Chenwu stared at the bullet shell-sized grains as he forced a smile. "How's the production quantity of these?" Zhang Chen asked in an undertone. "The production quantity is substantial, but there is a strict requirement for soil quality. Only soil with both radiation and contamination below 20 could be used. Thus no soil in Wanghai fits this condition. Even in Jinshu, there is not a lot of land that can produce this crop. Although the plantation tower can grow this, the cost would be high." Zhao Chenwu paused and grabbed a few grains out of the bag. "The starch of this type of shell grain possess a few types of special plant proteins because of its compact structure. If it were cooked into rice, usually the outside would be overcooked, but the inside would still be undercooked. Therefore, this type of shell grain would usually be used to make flour and then mixed with a special type of butter produced by mutant meat to make bread or cookie, or even alcohol. My trade fleet saw those in Wu City. Of course, when I saw that they could produce food, to be honest, I was surprised. I originally thought that only the Northern Area Alliance and some of the fallout shelters could produce food, but somehow people managed to discover an edible mutated crop. Radiation brought too many surprises to this land. Similar to no one knowing what monsters would walk out from the nuclear pit, no one knows what treasures are hidden inside. When the plants from the old world could no longer grow on this piece of soil, New plants of the New World replaced them and prospered. Would this type of mutated plant not accumulate toxins? Jiang Chen was confused. In his impression, the reason why most of the plants on the wasteland land could not be used was due to the toxins in the soil accumulating in the plant itself. It was the reason why mutated fruits were not edible and could only be used as ingredients for nutrient supplies. The shell grain is unique. The toxins are accumulated in the shell of the grain so it can be edible without throwing it into the organic converter. Zhao Chenwu let out a sigh. This was not good news. With the crop flowing into Wanghai, it would impact the monopoly that the Fishbone Base and Zhao Corporation have in the food business. Although the taste was nowhere comparable to rice, for the poor that could not afford rice, it was a good substitute. Seeing that Jiang Chen was silent, Zhao Chenwu proposed. I recommended Chunan increase the tax on shell grains. Oh? His response was? Jiang Chen asked, free trade. Zhao Chenwu shrugged helplessly. He has the same idea as me. Okay, since this is your business. Zhao Chenwu saw that Jiang Chen was not moved, sighed, and didn't insist. Protectionism was meaningless other than making the poor unable to afford the top grain. Even if they didn't eat this, it was unlikely they would purchase the food they couldn't afford anyway. Subjectively speaking, the shell grains existing in the 6th Street would be helpful in boosting the population. Only with enough food could it feed more people. From a long-term perspective, its entry is more beneficial. After he departed with Zhao Chenwu, it was getting late. Therefore, Jiang Chen decided to stay the night at Paradise Island Hotel. The next morning, Jiang Chen took the helicopter back to the Fishbone Base. 1,000 slaves stood at the square inches front of the community center, under the statue of the Mother of Deathclaw. The slaves' clothes were all replaced with Fishbone's uniform. Although they were not at ease with what was happening, they didn't have room to resist with a rifle pointed towards them. Cheng Weigo was on top of the temporarily installed podium and was lecturing the new recruits. He then announced the rules of the Fishbone Base as well as the training plan for the next 3 months. Jiang Chen avoided the square and returned to the mansion before he went to Yao Yao's room. The bedroom door was open when he walked in. The Lilai was working on a mechanical helmet. Ah, Big Brother is back. Is there something you need me for? Yao Yao's eyes immediately lit up with stars when she noticed Jiang Chen. She took off her welding mask and turned around in joy. Her thin legs dangled on the side of the chair as they matched perfectly with her pink dress. There is something. What is this? Jiang Chen rubbed her head. A brainwave signal converter device. If Sister Ziru could put it on, she could walk without a wheelchair. Yao Yao's large eyes as she said in happiness. Really? Then thank you Yao Yao. With a shy blush on her face, Yao Yao smiled. It is all Lin Lin's work. I only worked on the database and chip processing. Lin Lin? He didn't think she would care so much for other people. Jiang Chen was delighted by the thought. Big Brother has something that Yao Yao can help with. Yao Yao blinked her crystal-like eyes as she scanned Jiang Chen's face. Sun Zhao copied the library's database to your place, right? Could you search for me if there are mining resources deposition maps in there? Mining resources deposition maps? Let me look for them. The white stocking-covered feet was just long enough to reach the slippers on the floor. Yao Yao slid her chair to the other computer table as she rapidly typed on the screen. A blue loading bar appeared in the middle. Half a minute later, 37 search results popped up. Jiang Chen stood behind her as he confirmed map by map, but he didn't see anything he wanted. Why are these all production output data? No specific deposition information? Jiang Chen forced a smile. Sorry, I didn't manage to help you. Yao Yao lowered her head in disappointment. No. It is not Yao Yao's fault. Perhaps this geological information is too sensitive and not recorded in the city library's database. Jiang Chen comforted her. It made sense. How would these key information appear in a library open to everyone? If it is not in the library, would it be at the Wanghai Geology Ministry? Yao Yao suggested. She didn't want to just give up. Ministry of? That's a good idea. Could your computers search for the location of it? The map on the EP was only an aerial map. It could only recognize stations, airports, hospital or other prominent landmarks. No problem. Leave it up to Yao Yao. The library's database has city maps from before the war. Here it is. As she said this, Yao Yao already dragged out the map and presented it in front of Zhang Chen. On the outskirt of the city center, Zhang Chen with a frown stared at the red dot on the map. Chapter 373, Airborne. The helicopter engine roared. Sitting in the cabin, Zhang Chen conducted a final check of the equipment on him. He was wearing the new sample model of the T4 power armor, pitch black painting and thick front armor. The armor, renowned for its defense, looked a lot more reliable than the T3. Weapon system, functional, power system, functional. Lights flashed as Zhang Chen scanned each of the modules of the power armor. Although there were some differences to the operating system compared to the T3, the look remained mostly the same. The cursor in his field vision moved with the focal point of his pupils. After he confirmed that all systems were operational, Zhang Chen grinned at the T3 across from him. Of course, through the metal box. He knew she couldn't see him. Are you a kid? Sun Zhao mocked. Remember to close your communication channel next time you chuckle like that. Sun Zhao, without any consideration of his dignity, continued to mock him. Yao Yao beside Zhang Chen giggled discreetly while covering her mouth. She was not in a power armor but had an earphone attached to her mouth. She could obviously hear their conversation. Zhao Gang in a carbon nano suit had a ghost sniper rifle in his hand. He sat there without saying a word. From the not-so-expressive face, Zhang Chen couldn't determine if he had no reaction or was trying hard not to laugh. As to the two other soldiers in power armor, Zhang Chen guessed they didn't dare to laugh. Yao Yao put on the protective suit, Sun Zhao reminded her. They were about to enter the high radiation zone, MHMM. Yao Yao obediently took out the full gray body protective suit and stepped inside. The mission was simple: airdrop at the Ministry of Geology and retreat by helicopter. Combat units, 4 power armors, 1 sniper, and 1 hacker. To conduct a mission in the zombie-concentrated city center, there was no use in having an advantage in numbers. Unless an army was sent, there was no way you could outnumber the zombies. Of course, there was no point to do that just for a resource deposition map, because the helicopter was equipped with the Type 50 electromagnetic cannon, not including the pilots. It could only transport a maximum of 6 power armors. Because the T4S weighed nearly double the T3S, they barely managed to squeeze in 4 people. With the consideration that they could encounter a Deathclaw or other problematic mutants, the people executing the mission must have strong combat ability. However, while the Fishbone base had a lot of soldiers, most of them were slaves before. They did receive training, but their training was mostly just normal combat. King Pu's survivors were all experienced hunters capable of hunting mutants, but Zhang Chen never allowed them to learn how to operate a power armor. Based on the information security level of the Ministry of Geology, Yao Yao must follow them. She was young, but her gift in programming was not bad to begin with. After a year of extensive studying, no one had better skills than her in the entire base. Sun Zhao disagreed with Zhang Chen coming along, as she stated that she would protect Yao Yao, just like when they robbed the vault together. Nonetheless, Zhang Chen was still worried as it was near the city center. The danger level was nowhere comparable with the banks at King Pu, so he insisted on going with them. Arriving at the target location, the pilot's voice sounded in the public channel. "I am the first post." Zhao Gang stood up, grabbed the descending jetpack on his back, and walked to the hatch. The hatch opened as turbulence flooded in. Yao Yao tightly held onto Zhang Chen's hand and narrowed her adorable eyes. Zhang Gang bumped fist with the gunner inside the hatch and then jumped down without hesitation. He landed on a skyscraper 1,000 meters away from the Ministry of Geology to provide sniping support while guiding the cannon. The hatch door didn't close. The helicopter moved forward another 1,000 meters before it hovered over their destination. "Prepare to depart," Zhang Chen spoke in the public channel, then squeezed Yao Yao's hand, and walked to the hatch. "First time parachuting?" Sun Zhao spoke into the private channel. "I have tried countless times in the virtual reality training chamber." Zhang Chen grinned, and then followed the person in front of him, jumping from 1,000 meters above ground. The chilling wind swept across the surface of the armor. The turbulence screeched beside his ears. Different from the training inside the virtual reality chamber, there was no loading here. There was no opportunity to redo once failed. Height 900 meters. Sun Zhao's calm voice transmitted from the public channel. 700 meters. 500 meters. Open the descending device. At the same time, Zhang Chen activated the turbine engines behind him. The eerie blue flame burst out as the drag force quickly halted the rapid downfall of the power armor. The scenery on the ground gradually increased in size. Through the helmet, Zhang Chen already saw the street tightly packed with zombies. The airport was nearby, and before the war, it was a high-traffic area. The dead bodies not cleaned up were the culture of X1 bacteria. The engine output was at its maximum. Zhang Chen adjusted his landing position with both feet directed at the ground. Boom! Concrete dust scattered everywhere as two giant pits appeared on the concrete ground. The zombies' blank stares moved in their direction as their eyes began to turn a bloodthirsty red. The daytime was not its home field. But this didn't mean they will let the living creature beside their mouths escape. Without stopping, Zhang Chen immediately raised his left leg and swept away the zombies leaping at him like a hammer. The Trident revolving machine guns rotated as bullets splashed out like raindrops. It took down a giant area of zombies. At the same time, the other power armors all landed. Enter the Ministry of Geology. As soon as she gained footing, Sun Zhao immediately ordered. Understood. 3 replies echoed as the 4 quickly moved towards the building. Because it was located at the outskirt of the city center, they were uncertain about the stability of the building. The power armor's landing location, therefore, couldn't be chosen on the roof of the building. The threat of a thrower and an acid bug that possessed long-range threat meant that the helicopters couldn't be too close to the ground, so the 4 could only drop onto the street. They dashed into the door. Zhang Chen, who was responsible for the securing the back end, kicked a few zombies dashing at him to the other side of the street. Then he fired his machine gun at the waves of zombies. At the same time, 1,000 meters away, Zhao Gang crawled onto the roof with the crosshairs at the zombies flooding towards the Ministry of Geology. In the scope, a 3 meters high thrower waved its feeble legs, and giant stomach stumbled towards the door before it threw the infant zombie in its hand. The infant-sized zombie was aimed directly at Zhang Chen, but it was dissected into several parts by a bullet. Distance 1,100 meters. Zhao Gang took a deep breath and pressed the trigger. Bang! Over 1,100 meters in the distance, the sniper rifle bullet penetrated the neck of the thrower without any doubt. The black blood splattered everywhere, and the thrower immediately died. At the same time, its stomach blew up as a bunch of zombie infants crawled out and let out terrifying screams. It was the monster that was the most difficult to deal with in the city center. The infant zombies would expand rapidly when it approached its target. Then, it would blow up and emit highly concentrated zombie bacteria. Although these type of attacks were ineffective against the power armor that defended against nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons, it was the most difficult to deal with to the rather slow infantries. Not far away in the distance, a few more throwers were moving towards the Ministry of Geology. Even 2 Russians were slowly moving in their direction. Should be ready. When he saw Zhang Chen's hand signal, Zhao Gang understood. He aimed the cross at the waves of zombies as he flipped open the laser mark switch. 10 kilograms mass bomb loaded. Fire. Followed by the rumble that broke through the sound barrier. 1 bomb landed from the sky and smashed into the middle of the zombies. Boom! The shells scattered as it completely swept the area. When the dust faded, Zhang Chen and the team already retreated into the building. The zombies who had lost the target roared for a moment longer before they returned to their slowness. Direct hit. Nice shot. Zhao Gang grinned and closed the laser marker. Just like the plan, this mission was not difficult. Chapter 374. Underground Data Center. Using the stairs, Zhang Chen headed up to the roof and placed the airdrop marker on a relatively flat piece of ground. After about 15 minutes, Yao Yao drifted down from the air with the descending jetpack in a trial of blue flames. It was her first time parachuting. When the girl landed, Her body was still tensed up. Not until Zhang Chen took off her jetpack did her pale face gain back some life. Sun Jiao observed the zombies returning to peace on the street. Okay, all is ready, prepare for action, she ordered in the public channel as she took out her tactical rifle. Roger, including Zhang Chen, the three all took out their weapons, locked and loaded. Don't be afraid, follow me. Zhang Chen comforted the girl in the private channel. Yao Yao's face turned slightly red as she followed behind Zhang Chen. The excessive protection and the happiness it brought almost made her dizzy. Although it was not the first time she was out executing a mission, it was her first time with Zhang Chen. The space inside the Ministry of Geology was spacious, and the transparent rotating stairs headed deep into the ground. From the design of the stairs alone, Zhang Chen felt the deep ill intention of the designer. It was a statement against people who feared height. But what he didn't know was that these stairs were made mostly for decoration purposes. In the highly digitalized 22nd century, rarely did people choose such an outdated method to move. The building design extending down was standard in the 22nd century. To stuff in the 10 billion people in Pak while retaining arable land, it was a must choice for history to expand downwards. The wealthy people lived in the skyscrapers, and the poor lived at the base of it. This was the culture before the war. Yao Yao without combat ability stayed in the middle with Zhang Chen while a T4 soldier in front scouted for any dangers in the dark building. Why are there no zombies inside this type of building? Zhang Chen asked Sun Jiao in the private channel. Since they were in the office area, there should be a lot of bodies here. Two possibilities: the people here before the war evacuated on time, or it may be a mutant nest. Sun Jiao scanned the dark zone with her tactical flashlight. Which possibility do you lean towards? Nobody should be the first. Zhang Chen was unsure. Why a questioning tone? Because there is no absolute in the wasteland. After being peaceful for so long, I feel like my instinct is a bit dull. Sun Jiao sighed. Zhang Chen didn't respond as he was even more alert than before. The mechanical crosser moved to every corner where danger could arise. For some reason, the underground without a bottom made him feel unsettled. 15th floor underground. When they stepped down the last stair, the five finally came to the bottom. Zhang Chen opened the map to confirm the location of the data center before he walked to the hallway near the wall. Damn it, what is this? A soldier poked the egg on the wall with his muzzle as he cursed in a small voice. Don't touch anything, Sun Jiao shouted in the public channel as the soldier immediately moved back. What is that? Directing a flashlight towards it, Zhang Chen stopped as he looked at the watermelon-sized eggs along the wall. Sun Jiao went up and examined it carefully. I don't know, I have never seen this before. The database in the EP doesn't show anything yet. Should we collect some for sampling? Zhang Chen scanned the disgusting eggs that gave him goosebumps. Do it when we leave. If the eggs are connected to the mother somehow, damaging it would create unnecessary uncertainties. Yao Yao looked around anxiously. For some reason, she had an ominous feeling. Feeling Yao Yao's unease, Zhang Chen comforted her in a soft voice. Don't be afraid, I will protect you. I heard a weird voice. Voice? Zhang Chen frowned. He didn't hear anything. Yao Yao said in a low voice, it's a weird kind of noise. Perhaps it's just my illusion. Don't worry. Illusion? Zhang Chen hesitantly looked down the hall. Since they were already there, it was not his style to return empty-handed. The five people continued to move, with Zhang Chen leading. After the discovery of the eggs of an unknown creature, no one let their guard down anymore as they used 200% of their focus and cautiously looked out for any potential threats. Yao Yao still tightly followed behind Zhang Chen. Although the cold armor didn't feel like his warm temperature, the close distance made her feel more at ease. Fu Ke, the eggs are everywhere. A soldier cursed out as his rifle pointed at the glass down the hall. The flashlight lit up the entire room as the eggs filled the space. Try not to alert them, finish as soon as we can, Zhang Chen ordered. Yes. After they passed through the last door, they finally reached the data center. Inside the circular room was 4 screens that pointed in each direction. On the outskirt of the room were computers that stopped functioning. Along the arc-shaped dome, Light filtered through. Paper documents and broken touchscreen were scattered everywhere on the floor, together with the dust. It made a crunching sound when stepped on. Yao Yao walked into the room as she gently put her hand on her left chest. The sound was getting closer. For some reason, the faint static noise made her feel comfortable. She wanted to say something, but she clenched her teeth and resisted the temptation. Although she enjoyed Zhang Chen's care for her, subconsciously she didn't want him to treat her as a child that must be protected. 2 soldiers guarded the door. Zhang Chen and Sun Zhao brought Yao Yao forward. Sun Zhao took out the backup crystal fuel rod and inserted it into the backup power slot of the server. The faint sound of electricity flowing appeared. After many years, the servers finally flashed the light green indicator light. Start. Zhang Chen encouragingly looked at Yao Yao. Yao Yao nodded and walked to the computer. But at that time, the screens lit up. A familiar face appeared in the middle of the screens. That's surprising. We meet again. Looking at the completely shocked Zhang Chen, Lin Keoan sneered. Chapter 375. We meet again. Yao Yao blankly stared at the person on the screen. Zhang Chen subtly raised his muzzle, but Lin Keoan raised his hands, surrendering. Don't overreact. Are you not going to wait for me to finish? Instinct tells me that it is not words I want to hear. Maintaining his shooting position, Zhang Chen locked right onto him. Lin Keoan, why would this guy appear here? Who is he? Sun Zhao looked at Lin Keoan with a frown. A robot that always causes trouble for me. Whether it is intentional or not, Zhang Chen said. No, you may have mistaken. Lin Keoan waved his hands and smiled. I don't have any intention to cause anyone trouble, or rather, I am your only destination. Destination? Zhang Chen had a dubious smile. That's right, nothing is more adaptable than a metallic body in this miserable world. Join us, we'll grant you the perfect body, a body that will never age, and never die. His smile was noble, but it shined the same way as a demon's. Just like you? Zhang Chen raised his eyebrows and laughed. Stronger than me. Lin Keoan's smile was bright. Looks like it didn't take much to convince him. Therefore, the 6th Street will be part of Supreme's territory. In your dreams. Zhang Chen laughed. The smile froze on Lin Keoan's face. Then that's disappointing. Lin Keoan sighed. As an intermediate artificial intelligence, he didn't have anger as an emotion, or rather, even his smile was fake. As his words died down, a sharp screech came out of the data center, immediately followed by the sound of bubbles bursting. What happened? Sun Zhao's became alerted as she aimed for the door. The 2 soldiers raised the revolving machine gun on their left arm and anxiously aimed at the empty hallway. Poison teeth spider. An interesting bug. The door to the side of the hallway opened. The dense sound of the floor being scratched diffused through. Under the light of the flashlight, spiders the size of a shepherd moved its furry legs and flooded the room to the data center at the end of the hallway. Fire! Sun Zhao shouted and first pressed the trigger. Ta-ta-ta! The sparks from the bullets wavered in the hall and shredded the spiders into pieces. Flesh could not stand the test of machine guns. But machine guns could not sever the flow of the water. The endless amount of spiders like turbulent floods flowed forward, crushing the dead bodies before them. Damn it, too many. Sun Zhao gritted her teeth, her finger locked on the trigger. At the same time, a grenade was launched, and fire exploded inside the hallway. Dark green blood and severed corpses splattered onto the 2 soldiers' faces. 4 more grenades were launched as flame filled up the enclosed space. After the flame dispersed, the burning smell of flesh filled up the entire hallway. Traces of unextinguished flames still remained on the ground, but not a simple, complete poison teeth spider could be found. Burning grenade. The terminator of all carbon-based creatures. When did robots learn how to breed bugs? Zhang Chen put down the gun and looked at Lin Keoan in disgust. Although he knew that with the mask of the power armor, Lin Keoan could not see his disgust. I only closed the subwoofer suppressor that prevented these little things from breaking their egg. If you have time, why don't you give the disgusting but cute pets a new name? Since as intermediate artificial intelligence, I don't have any creativity, Lin Keoan said courteously. Voice disappeared. Yao Yao released her hand pressed to her chest and stared at the person on the screen. Because she spent a lot of time on electronic devices, she was sensitive to this type of noise. That's right, disappeared. Lin Kuo-an gently smiled, therefore, it should come out too. The ground began to tremble as a series of sharp glass shattering noises came from the room across the hallway, but then quickly faded. What is it? Zhang Chen was concerned. Shining a light in that direction resulted in emptiness. Are you really not going to consider surrendering? If you are willing to receive the salvation of the Supreme, I may consider sparing you. Lin Kuo-an smiled. I'm willing. Zhang Chen's face never blushed when he lied. There is a special medicine on the table at the corner. Although it is not prepared for you, drink it. In your dreams. Zhang Chen lifted the rifle and unleashed the bullets. The screen shattered. Yao Yao, extract the data. Zhang Chen ordered calmly. Okay. Yao Yao recovered from the shock as she returned to the screen and her fingers rapidly moved between the keys. Sun Zhao, deploy the drones. Okay. The Hummingbird drones were released from the back storage into the hallway. After it stabilized its position in the air, the drone flew to the hallway across D&M as it shared the image from its camera to the team. But the instant the drone crossed the door, Zhang Chen saw an angry face. The deathly silk covered every inch of the ceiling as the giant body filled up the entire room. Its terrifying teeth were like manes as they densely filled the mouth. A giant spider. The thick hair and teeth gave Zhang Chen a daunting chill down his spine. Although he didn't know how to read the expression of a spider, it must be furious right now since he probably just saw them kill all of its children. He then recollected the subwoofer suppressor that Lin Kuo-an mentioned as he tried to figure out the relationship between Lin Kuo-an and the spider. For some reason, Lin Kuo-an breeded these spider eggs and then used the subwoofer suppressor to suppress the mother spider at a specific location. While Zhang Chen didn't know why he bred these spiders, it must not be for a friendly purpose. The drone suddenly stopped. Like a mosquito stuck in a spider web, it was glued tight. Then a black shadow cut through before the picture turned into a static white. What are we going to do? Sun Zhao asked on the private channel. With this type of monster, the power armor is probably not enough. Zhang Chen looked at Yao Yao. The girl was completely calm. Her fingers rapidly moved between the screens, hacking the security software. The data is extracted. It was a young but affirmative voice. Could the subwoofer suppressor be activated? Zhang Chen asked. No, it's already deleted. Yao Yao desperately tried to recover the program, but the opponent completely removed any traces of it. Take the USB and get ready to leave. Zhang Chen reloaded and ordered, but the outside Sun Zhao reminded him. Helicopter, fire at the Ministry of Geology. He connected himself to the pilot channel and immediately ordered,